Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, we are back live right here at the International Design Conference, Design Futures. The future is now. How is everybody doing this afternoon? If it's your first time to see me as part of IDC, well, then hello. Allow me to introduce myself. I will be your host. My name is Jelly Victor. Now, for those of you who joined yesterday, thank you for being a part of this second day. And for the ones who are here with us this morning, thank you so much for coming back. Appreciate that you have chosen to spend your Friday afternoon, or actually the entire Friday, right here at the International Design Conference. I am happy to be back as well and extremely excited for what is in store for this latter half. Now, in case you wish to share your learnings or your experience from yesterday or any part of earlier today, please post using our hashtag the future is now, and hashtag IDC 2021. Since more often than not, we like to share on social media. We like to share the wonderful things that we come across. You can even share this live stream on your feed. Again, the hashtags are hashtag the future is now, hashtag IDC 2021. All right, we would love to see those posts. Just to give you an overview of what's coming up this afternoon, I will do a quick rundown of our sessions. I hope you're ready. Kicking things off is Design Futures, the value shift with Kim Manino of the WGSN. This session will be followed by Indy Johar of the Dark Matter Labs with futuristic strategies and design leadership. And last but certainly not the least, we will close the day off with Rex Lore of UNDP Accelerator Labs with accelerating the SDGs through social design and innovation. It is a jam-packed afternoon up ahead. So I hope you have your water. I hope you have energy. And more than anything else, I hope you have the enthusiasm and passion for everything that we are going to talk about this afternoon. Now, we hope you have the chance to freshen up between our morning and afternoon sessions, because we are back and ready to give you your dose of design and creativity right here at the IDC 2021. I'm going to turn you over to our first speaker in just a little bit. But first, let me thank our fantastic partners for making Design Futures, the future is now, possible. Much love going out to Adobo Magazine, British Council, HK Walls, Shoney Projects, Chasing Coral, Department of Trade and Industry Export Marketing Bureau, that's DTIEMB. Thank you so much for supporting this event. Don't think I'm letting you go without checking in. First of all, I want to know who was part of yesterday, who was part of earlier this morning, and what it is you're most excited about. Do let me know as well where it is that you are watching us from. If it's your first time, to send us a message over on the chat box if you're watching us from Zoom, or the comment section if you're watching us from Facebook. Please do not be shy and do that right now. So we have two check-in questions for you this afternoon. One will be a word cloud, and the second is an open-ended question for you to share your ideas a little bit more freely. We just want to hear from you. We will also be doing a quick poll after these questions, the results of which we will reveal right after our fireside chat. So I think our team is currently flashing, or we will be flashing the code right now. QR code for you to access our platform for the questions. Give that a scan. Just grab your phone, scan it so you can access the platform for the questions. If you're encountering some issues scanning the code, you can also log on to www.menti.com. Again, that's www.menti.com and use the code 4387-6504. Again, the code is 4387-6504. Are you there? Okay, for the questions, here's number one. It's a word cloud. Preferably just one word for your answer. What do you value most right now? Is it your family, your health, your security? Log those in and make sure to keep it short and sweet, preferably just one word, because we will be turning it into a word cloud. I'm seeing health, time, money, dogs, life, family. What else? Money, health, family, work. Well, right now we have a mix of work and family because work is at home for most of us, right? Family and friends, balance, mental health. Send in more of your answers, please. The code is 43876504. Mental health. I'm mighty glad that we are prioritizing that these days. Now more than ever, creativity. That is beautiful. Absolutely. We should always feed that, I feel. Friends, do you get to see your friends? Do you get to physically be with them? Well, whether you get to physically connect with them, I feel like you should always check in with your friends. Collaboration, indeed. We heard a lot of that this morning. The pets, I am loving that. Family and friends, thriving, thrive energy. A little bit of a tip if you're already noticing that your energy is dipping or it's not as good as you would want it to be, just put one foot in front of the other. Just do the next right thing, no matter how trivial you might think it is. Okay, I believe that is it for our answers for the first question. Thank you so much for sending that. I appreciate it. Okay, next question. What steps are you currently taking to protect those that you value? Everything that you said earlier, all of your answers, I want to know this time around, what steps are you currently taking to protect those that you value? You had answers like money, family and friends, mental health, balance, creativity. So the question is, what steps are you currently taking to protect those things that you mentioned? Sleep early, eat healthy food, insurance, very good answers. Meditation, absolutely. Always start and end your day with that. Creating boundaries, quality time with friends, rest, reading books, doing hobbies, managing time, setting boundaries, discipline, turning off my phone. Yes, I totally agree with you on that one. Try your best not to start and end your day with the phone being the last thing you're looking at. You should set sort of like a curfew with your phone use, being responsible, educating yourself, discipline. Great answers, you guys. We have a few more. I can see one. There are more showing up. Quality time with friends, rest, reading books, doing hobbies, naming everything in there, right? Okay, can we scroll to the bottom so I get to see the stuff that's down there? Okay, exercising, working out, talking with friends, listing down the things that I am grateful for, the attitude of gratitude, designing your daily schedule, making sure that you have time for yourself. Absolutely prioritize yourself and never feel guilty for doing that, especially if you're a parent, you're a mom, and you're taking care of others. You cannot love from an empty cup, Okay, do we have any more answers? Listing down the things that I'm grateful for. We do that after prayer at night. My family, we would talk about what it is we are most grateful for that happened within the day. Eat healthy meals, follow protocols, and engage in practical and creative activities like gardening and art making. Stepping away from unhealthy relationships. Yes, good on you. Spending time with family, stepping away from unhealthy relationships. That's also related to, if you saw earlier, creating boundaries, setting boundaries. Yes, you are cutting ties or at least distancing yourself, social distancing with anything that is unhealthy for you. Getting vaccinated. And I love that smiley. Loving yourself. Yes, getting vaccinated. If you have the opportunity to do so, go right ahead because it protects you. It protects the other people around you, if that's what you believe in, of course. Okay, so thank you. Appreciate all of your answers. For the steps that you are currently taking, thank you very much for participating in that. We still have a poll that's coming up, but thank you for the results that you posted on menti.com. Now, on to our poll for this afternoon. What are people spending more money and time on? Again, what are people spending more money and time on? Is it A, plants, B, healthy food, C, space makeover, or D, Netflix? What is your answer? I will give you a personal insight on this, even though we're supposed to choose just one, right? In the beginning of the pandemic, back in 2020, I would say I spent quite a sum on plants. I think that's pretty evident with my background. And then it changed into a space makeover because I had to create this studio so I can host at home. I had to create a space for my daughter so she can do school. But right now, it's definitely healthy food and just taking care of myself by, taking classes, working out online, and doing all of those things. So I am looking forward to hearing from all of you and your choices. Okay, A, B, C, or D. Send in your answers, place your votes now, and we will reveal the results later on. Related to these questions, we have our first speaker this afternoon, the Director of Trend Curation of the Worth Global Lifestyle Network, or WGSN, the global authority on consumer design trends. I am talking about Kim Manino. In her keynote today entitled The Value Shift, she will be presenting an analysis of what people will prioritize, appreciate, and value, not just now, not in the past, but over the next 2 years, outlining the 5 key global drivers influencing consumers as they navigate a post-pandemic world and the recession-proof strategies that can gain businesses market share. Please welcome to the Design Future stage, Kim Manino. Hi, Kim.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Well, I'm well. Strange lighting, so I apologize. But if I have the blinds open, I've got the sun streaming in behind me. So it's a real pleasure to join everyone today. Thank you so much for having me here today. So it's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Kim, I've been asking everyone joining us today where it is that they are checking in from. I would like to ask you the same. Where are you? Where are you right now?
So I'm currently in London. Our office is based right slap bang in the middle of London in Piccadilly, but like most people, we are most of us still working from home. So today I'm in West London, and again, the world isn't opened up entirely, and we're still all being careful about working from home.
Okay, you know what? People watching us right now who are probably working while at home and watching us probably feel really good that, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kim. Before I give the floor open, give the virtual stage to you for your presentation, we're just curious, how is the pandemic situation out there? You mentioned that you're still not really comfortable about stepping out and you're still working from home. Aside from that, how's the situation over in the UK?
It's interesting. Everyone's still very cautious. We've been lucky enough to have the vaccine rolled out very well across the UK. And, most everyone I know has been double vaccinated. They're starting to vaccine now the younger children from 12 and up.
Okay.
So from a safety point of view, I think everyone's feeling better in that respect, but everyone's still extremely cautious about going out. It's quite sad when you go out and you see so many stores that have closed.
Yes.
Restaurants, cafes that used to be very busy, teeming with people, are really empty. Even in central London, I was there last week walking down Regent Street, which is a main thoroughfare for anyone who knows London.
Yes.
And it was eerily quiet. It was
Oh
like
my.
10:30 in the morning, which would normally be teeming with people. So everyone's still being very, very cautious. And it feels when you do go out, it feels very, it just doesn't feel real,
Okay.
so we're all, being really cautious. And I think the same is happening. I've got family in America, and the same is happening there. Everyone's still being very, very cautious.
And just to add to that, it's exactly the same here in the Philippines. And I feel your sentiment that it's disheartening when you go out and see usually the very busy places, not a soul in sight. Okay, before I turn it over all to you, Kim, because we definitely want to hear all about the situation. And like we said earlier, what it is that people will be appreciating for the next 2 years. I just want to remind our audience to comment your questions to Kim, reactions, comments, send that over, especially your questions, send that over or messages in our inbox so that we can discuss them later on in our fireside chat. So at this point, if you will excuse me, Kim, I will leave you on the virtual stage.
Yeah, sure. And I just want to say, once I start presenting, all I can see is my screen of my presentation. So anyway, looking much forward to doing this with you all today. So let me get going and start the ball rolling. So here today to talk to you about the value shift. And this comes from a white paper that we produced last year. And we feel very strongly that this is still very, very relevant. And it's about the consumer drivers and recession-proof strategies that we really need to be looking at as we go forward and coming out of this pandemic. So, as we just spoke, there's still a great deal of uncertainty. We do know, it is going to take us a long time to, will we ever get back to normal? So at WGSN, we were already predicting some changes. We were, pre-pandemic, we were looking at the world of wellness, the world of digitization. And we've seen this fragmented recovery coming across the globe with the rollout of the vaccine. But, the pandemic has unified things for all of us. It might have been that, we felt things at different times. Maybe the wellness trend was trickling across different parts of the region at different times before the pandemic. But with the pandemic came the feeling that we are all in the same boat. So we've all really feeling this, that we are unified in our fears, in our anxieties, but we know that people want security, we know that people want stability, and we all need absolutely 100% this sense of optimism. So today, talking to you just about the sentiment shifts that we need to look at and outlining 5 global drivers that we think will influence consumers. And again, this stems, and it came up in your word search there, from, financial security right through to a quest for truth. So again, just to remind you that actually, again, this came from a very long white paper that we wrote about. So I can touch on much of it, but not all of it. So, and anyone who's interested in WGSN, we are here to help navigate change and help our customers design a better future. So WGSN is a future forecaster, and we have been going for over 20 years, and we really are here to help our clients navigate change. So the value shift, what we're looking at is, we hope the pandemic is on its way behind us, but we do know that with all the variants that come forward, that, we are going to perhaps be living with this for quite some time. So here is really a snapshot of the 5 consumer drivers that we think are going to be really important for businesses to focus on. Starting with financial anxiety, and there are huge signs of financial uncertainty. Again, we just talked about stores that are closed, cafes that are closed, deserted high streets. Secondly, health concerns. I mean, again, well-being was already important before COVID, but now it's just a huge concern for all of us, along with self-care. Loneliness. a feeling of being cut off. And again, that was something we spoke about pre-pandemic in terms of Gen Z and youth always being online and not really connecting physically with people. We already knew that there was this feeling of being cut off and a worry of mental health. But of course, through COVID, again, that has just got so huge in terms of, you know, not just Gen Z, but multi-generational, because we were all so cut off. And the only way that we were able to connect was through digital. The quest for truth, fake news, you know, that was starting before, you know, when we heard about, you know, what went on with the presidential election in the US and Trump always going on about, you know, fake news. And what's changed is that the newscasters, we weren't listening to them anymore. The scientists have become the heroes. So it's about reinforcing trust. And we need to look at supply chains and be, you know, really open and honest about what's happening with our supply chains. And finally, really looking at safety and personal safety. Civil unrest has been huge. We've all gone through collective trauma. And throughout this, we've tracked at WGSN the huge importance of home, and, you know, again, everyone's still being very cautious about going out in the world. So these are the mindsets and the shifts that we're going to be looking at in terms of helping you to prepare for what's next. So starting with financial anxiety, you know, we don't even need to look at the stock exchange to understand the ups and downs of the global economy. And, you know, countries are deploying stimulus packages, reducing interest rates. We've had furloughing in the UK where people have been paid even though they couldn't go to work. Lots of incentives have been there to jumpstart communities through all these spending packages, but still financial anxiety is remaining a key sentiment. And it's clear that we've all seen a real downturn in the economy, and it's going to, you know, it's already affected world markets, and it's affecting consumers at every level. So a recent Time Next Advisor poll found that 51% of Americans were experiencing financial anxiety. And these are percentages from last year. So, you know, we know these have carried across. 40% of Canadians ranked keeping the economy healthy as the most important factor. Safeguarding mental health, hugely, hugely important. A Kantar study found that 60% of people across Asia were worried about financial security, with 46% worried about their physical well-being. So again, we know that, you know, everyone is suffering from this huge worry around finance. And therefore that results in people not spending money like they were. So people now, even a good 18 months since COVID hit, are still really anxious about spending money because they're really uncertain about the future. You know, many people are really worried about job losses, salary cuts. There's talk of working weeks going from 5 days to 4 days, you know, and what will that mean for, you know, for salaries. So, you know, huge amount of financial anxiety around this. So, you know, we've been analysing this value shift around our relationship to products. In 2016, we forecast a mainstream shift towards buying products with a sense of purpose as opposed to newness. So we've been talking a lot about product that should last longer, apparel that is not just deemed for one season. And although value is traditionally centered around a product's cost, it's now much more about the product's worth. How long will it last for? What are the qualities of the materials that are made for the product? So products that keep people healthy, secure, and safe are going to have a much higher value, and they will attract more of the consumers' budgets. So, you know, again, we will be spending money, but we're going to be very discerning about where we spend it. So consumers are going to be seeking more affordable versions of everyday essentials, or wants luxury treats. So, again, very discerning customer coming forward. We're all going to, hand on heart, I'm doing exactly the same, being extremely careful about the things I'm purchasing and looking at how long is that going to last me. So, looking at value. So again, it's not just about price. It's really about looking at quality, at looking at, we know that a lot of categories throughout COVID did very well. So food and drink, many more people were cooking. People were buying much more fresh food, spending more time cooking because they were at home and they couldn't go out. So food prices have risen, and they might stay high due to the supply chain. I know certainly here we're having a lot of issues around distribution. We've lost a lot of lorry drivers, and so goods are not being delivered into store. A couple of weeks ago, we didn't have any milk in our supermarkets. This morning I heard that there's a lot of petrol stations that are without petrol, and it's not because there's a shortage of petrol, but we've got a shortage of drivers getting the petrol from A to B. So again, consumers are being very, very cautious, and therefore they're looking to local markets. They're looking, throughout the pandemic, I think it's true to say that everyone looked to their local store, to the little convenience store on the corner. And as well as, obviously, we all jumped into e-commerce. For those that weren't already shopping online, that's risen hugely. So we know the likes of Amazon and Pinduoduo were great winners, but also the big discount stores, the convenience stores, the supermarkets that were selling large sized items, so that you didn't have to go out as often as you thought. So people are starting, and have been since the pandemic, to continue to buy in bulk. So whereas before you might have bought small items because you went out more often, people don't want to go to stores as often. So therefore, people are looking to buy in bulk, and people are looking to buy from sort of these large discount stores. So again, it's about adding value. Value, again, is it needs to think about multi-purpose, multifunctional, and again, it's about size. It's about buying bigger. We're not traveling anymore, so we don't need the little shampoo and conditioner that we took when we're traveling. Quite the opposite. We're buying kind of supersized shampoos. So again, we don't have to keep going out to buy things. So, and we have to also think about products that will have a longer shelf life. So in the beauty realm, we're seeing products that are perhaps more waterless, therefore they're going to last longer. For fashion and interiors, scarce resources also affect the product. And again, this idea of making do and mend will come forward with the idea of repairing and reusing. So really looking at, ways of that idea again of longevity. And even in the resale market, we've seen a huge rise in that. So, in terms of value food shopping, we've seen a huge rise here in Europe of the discounting grocer Aldi as well as Lidl, and they focus on own label goods, and they've opened 70 stores in the last year. So this is a time where food retailers want to maybe think about creating sort of own brands and consider these real kind of value ranges, but also making sure they're nutritious, they're healthy, and of high quality. Again, the super sizes about, bigger packaging because we don't want to go out so often, and definitely a step away from those smaller items that we might have kept for when we traveled, because of course we're not traveling now. Multitasking products as well. We really want to think about products that do more than one thing. and you know, the same can be said for apparel as well as furniture. We found that, you know, when you've got so many people at home, which we've had throughout the pandemic, and people are spending much more time at home, we want products that can be multifunctional, that can be moved around the home, that can be used for different purposes, but at the same time, the same with clothing. So we really want to think about clothing that's adaptable, and we're getting more value for money. And certainly in that repair and reuse, you know, we've seen a lot of rise in craft. And actually, you know, the idea of the old adage of make, do and mend is, and the rise of craft has meant that people have become more interested in looking at repairing things. And of course, the waste, we're very aware of waste and landfill, so that becomes even more important. And even with this idea of resale, we've got a resale platform in Europe here, Depop. They saw 150% increase year on year from 2019 to 2020. Walmart in the US partnered up with ThreadUp so that they could bring secondhand clothing onto their platform. In Korea, a mobile app called Gus Gus and Carousel in Singapore, similar sites serving Southeast Asian communities. So, you know, it's also gone into interiors. It's not just about clothing. It's also, at one time it was all about Gen Z who were buying on these resale apps, but now, you know, that has changed, and there's older demographics that are getting into this. I met with a friend just the other day. She got made redundant. She is probably 59, I think she is. She got made redundant. She's actually buying and selling clothes as part of a kind of new way of living. So, you know, again, this has been huge, this idea of resale. So we're seeing more and more, and we're also seeing resale and rental in furniture as well. So that's really interesting. So opportunities here for adding value. You know, again, the discount stores that are doing own brand, you know, they've really risen throughout the pandemic, and people now, you know, in saving money, people will continue to shop in that way. Multitasking and supersized products, refillable products, which lend themselves to sustainability, and also, of course, you know, reduced packaging. So it's a win-win. It's about creating value ranges. It's really, you know, even thinking about core ranges within apparel. Explore opportunities for this idea of own label, and really, you know, sort of keeping things simple. Resale, repair, you know, think about bringing in craft kits, think about tutorials that might explain to your consumer how they can personalize the product, or how they also can repair it should it become broken. So, you know, great opportunities here to build back better. Our second driver, health concerns. So obviously, health concerns have been hugely exacerbated by the pandemic, and the concerns, you know, we've not only been concerned for ourselves, but our family, our colleagues. You know, this is a critical consumer sentiment. So self-care is definitely shifting. You know, we saw a lot about self-care and wellness, but that's shifting also to self-coping, because of course mental health, and that did come up, you know, earlier in the questioning with the menti.com platform that you were using. You know, mental health is really also linked to our physical health. So, you know, we've had this induced stress put up upon us, and it's right across the world. You know, this is, again, there were times pre-COVID, and there will be in the future where, you know, there's possibly a volcano or a hurricane, where there's tragedy in certain parts of the world, but we've had it globally across the world. You know, there've been studies, and there have been many studies, I'm sure, and, you know, but just quoting one in particular, that you know, last year there was a study by ABC News and the Washington Post that said 70% of people in the US were experiencing stress as a result of the crisis. You know, huge numbers there. And it's certainly had a huge impact on all of our mental health. It's been very, the levels of stress and anxiety have risen so substantially. So, well-being has been a consumer priority for quite some time, but again, with this new convergence of both mental health and physical well-being is really, really quite new. And frankly, people, it's been tough and people aren't coping. So again, we at WGSN were certainly tracking the rise of self-care, through the well-being trend that we saw coming forward. And, we saw many products and services that were designed around emotions, and we will see we'll see that continued in the wellness market. But the next shift will see consumers focusing really on self-compassion, looking inwards to find solace through healthy survival mechanisms. Again, yoga, meditation, all of this, and also this huge necessity that we're going to have in terms of replenishing our mental well-being so that we can really maintain our physical well-being. So really think about delivering wellness. How can you cater to that health conscious consumer who's looking for those holistic solutions? We're going to find it in diet, in beauty, in fitness, in home hygiene, really looking at, the entire area of our lives. And food and beauty companies should really think about rapidly launching and repositioning products that really highlight potential benefits from immune support. We know there's this massive rise in searches for home care, self-care at home, and also people just working on their homes, redecorating. Home is our safety place. Home is where we've kept safe throughout the pandemic. And an incredible number there, 332% increase in searches on Pinterest around self-care at home from April last year. So, with consumers less willing or unable to afford visits to doctors, to health specialists and salons, they are learning to manage their own wellness and their own beauty at home. So really think about innovation and using technology to support these new services. And of course, the home workout category, another huge change brought about because of the pandemic, linked, of course, to self-care and well-being. Gyms were compromised, gyms were closed, and the home fitness area exploded, as well as the exercise outdoor. We've called it the outdoor boom. There was throughout the pandemic, the only way to exercise going out of the house was to walk or run or cycle. And of course, many people were staying very local as well. So you got to know your local parks better, you got to know your local neighborhoods better. And then we saw this huge rise in home fitness equipment as well. And so, of course, this has brought about, multiple opportunities, not just for equipment, but also for apparel and activewear. And we've also seen a massive rise in antiviral fabrics coming into this space. So, brands can really help improve this physical and mental well-being by having a stronger resilience and coming out with products that really support this. Again, it's about delivering wellness. This is an interesting thing in terms of a case study we looked at where Target in America launched a private label for its activewear line last year in 2020, and they called it All in Motion. Their strap line was made for every move, priced for every day. And what was interesting here was that most of the items were under $40, but they did feature moisture wicking and also ventilating fabrics, four-way stretch fabrics, flat seams. The range was also size inclusive, really capitalizing on the novice opportunity, because, you know, there were many people that perhaps hadn't exercised before, other than, you know, walking to the train station, or walking to work, or running for the bus. And therefore more and more people were starting to do exercise because they know they had to. So, you know, with Target, they made sure that they had ranges that fit all shapes, all sizes, all ages. They also had the line which did feature high levels of recycled and low impact materials. And here this graph is about consumers that were looking to increase their buying on sports and exercise in mind. And what was interesting was seeing that rise of the 55 to 74-year-olds who were starting to buy more active and sport exercise items. So, and that is something that we feel will continue, because again, it's so linked to both mental and physical health. So opportunities there in that idea of delivering wellness. You know, think about creating products that contain immune supporting ingredients if you're in the beauty or food world. Self-cleaning materials and technologies for the home. So we know that the UV light, you know, helps to disinfect. And we also, you know, there are many natural products that are coming for, you know, kind of back again, you know, vinegar being used to, you know, clean the home instead of chemicals. Exercise equipment that blends in better with home decor, you know, because there's been that rise of exercising at home, and, you know, you've got to find a place to put that equipment. Well, we've seen the rise in really interesting design for that equipment so that it doesn't look quite so gym-like. Apps that give more holistic views of health and the ability to fight infection. So, you know, huge rise in digitization of supporting our wellness. And again, that idea of looking at entry-level activewear that is age and size inclusive. So, you know, again, we've all lived and worn comfort wear throughout the pandemic. When, you know, silhouettes will change, but we still want that comfort level. But also, you know, we want that multi-purpose, whereby maybe it's a lounge, but it's also something that we can do our active wear in, active exercise in. And then again, it's, you know, looking at, you know, being inclusive. Don't just you know, it's not just the youth that are out there exercising, because we all need to do more exercise to keep our mental health and our physical health in a good space. And we've seen this rise of the older generations. So, you know, don't ignore them. Driver number 3, the loneliness syndrome. Well, you know, loneliness is something we spoke about at WGSN with Gen Z and those kind of young demographic that was so involved in social media and gaming, and there was a worry that they weren't really making real friendships, not real physical friendships, not meeting people outside of the house, spending hours and hours in their bedrooms on their digital you know, phones and tablets and laptops. But of course, with COVID and the pandemic, you know, we saw this huge rise in loneliness because there was this switch from physical to digital. It was the only way that we could connect. So the blurring of physical and digital has hugely accelerated around, and we've called it quarantainment, you know. So rather than entertainment, we were quarantined and we had to find entertainment. And that, you know, again, it has risen exponentially throughout the pandemic. And now there's this new multi-generational normal whereby, you know, again, it wasn't just the young people that were doing it, but all ages. So that crossover between physical and digital, which we call phygital, has really been accelerated by the pandemic. again, we forecast this emerging youth retail strategy around third spaces. So, the digital realm where Gen Z could shop, they could engage, they could play. But of course, that has now gone across all ages, and certainly tapping into online gaming. I mean, the rise in gaming throughout the pandemic was just enormous. So Newzoo, and they provide games market data, estimated that 2.7 billion global gamers will spend or will have spent $159.3 billion in 2020. So that's live streaming, TV shows, movies, gaming, and that is now that won't stop. That streaming economy will continue. I think it'll be really interesting to see how many people will actually go out to cinemas once the world opens up again. And we get back to some kind of normality of going out, because we're now so used to streaming. But again, this whole area of quarantainment that was forced upon us through the pandemic, we're going to be very wary about going out into the world. So these drivers will still continue. So, through this idea of loneliness and being quarantined and staying at home, we still strive for togetherness. We still really need to forge that bond with our families, with our friends. Socializing over food and drink was really a fundamental ritual. And that quarantining really put a stop to that. So it did bring this wave of virtual experiences. But what was interesting is, the online courses, the demos to, show us new culinary expertise, all the Zooming that we've done with families. It's brought about a lot of advantages as well, in terms of really looking at, things can be much more low cost or free, efficient, convenient. So, we had all these opportunities again to learn from the beauty of our own homes, and from across the globe as well. So, direct to customer innovation is applicable in lots of different categories. So really think about, how you might offer this out, offering professional results, support with expertise, assistance, and another way to build your community of consumers. So again, it's about inspiring community spirit, both in the real world and in the digital world. But again, with gaming and esports, there was a massive surge, and it's really opened the eyes up to many different industries about the opportunities in these spaces. So it's really, gaming, social apps like TikTok are really presenting new opportunities and real collaborations for brands. And it also, allows you to speak to your consumer and even go as far as designing together, in terms of, let's not design for people, but let's design with people. Target in America actually had a Design for All program, and it outlined the inclusive design processes behind a clothing and interior line, which was actually created with people from very diverse backgrounds and abilities. So they actually asked for the, opinion of their consumers to help them design product, to help them make product that was better and more accessible for people outside. So really think about working closely with your consumers, and not necessarily as focus groups, but really as co-designers. So really having them become involved through that digital space. So again, opportunities here, engage with your consumer, really look at these new online experiences and see how you can incorporate that around your business. Explore ways to unite your customers. Again, don't thinking more about your customers being a community of people that you're connecting with. It's not just about selling to them. It's really about, a new community that you can support for your business. Global and e-commerce brands can find ways to support local and small businesses, connecting with local brands, connecting with small businesses, connecting with local artists as well. We've seen a lot of localism. We've seen a lot of people not venturing far and therefore wanting to put back into their communities. So brands that connect with local artists, with ideas for good for the community, and doing that through your websites is a great way as well of connecting people. Developing products and tools that are easy to use, and again, this idea of expert assistance, helping your consumer. Gaming platforms, really we're seeing again that rise of the gaming platform, and really seeing sales of product through gaming. Huge area of growth, whereby again throughout the pandemic, even from say catwalk seasons, designers weren't able to present their shows, but a lot of them put product into gaming, which was really, really interesting, and that is going to be huge going forward. Again, think about recruiting creatives in your business who really have a great affinity for the gaming world, who really understand the gaming world, so therefore can push out ideas of how you can connect with that community. And then again, this feeling, this idea that, think about co-design, think about, under that umbrella as well comes made to order. And we've seen that really supports sustainability, with this idea that the consumer is willing to order something in advance, pay for it, wait for it to be made, and that, they may wait 6 weeks, 2 months for the product to come. But, having a platform where you allow the consumer to be able to order something that's made to order, but also help in the creation of what that product's going to look like. So really think about co-design. Driver 4, the quest for truth. Coronavirus has definitely put a premium on truth. Keeping everyone reliably informed has never been more critical. Again, this idea of, fake news that was about before the pandemic, the hype around fake news. And now, we really need to have, excuse me, I just had a sneeze in the middle of that. Again, we were, even before the pandemic, society was in the midst of this, epistemic crisis where misinformation became a weapon in this kind of increasingly partisan and post-truth world. But, staying informed is so critical now, and, tuning into media and wanting to know the real truth of what's happening. And, we're very much more listening to the scientists and the people from the medicine world more than we're listening to our governments. A global web index survey showed that 68% of media consumers across all generations in the UK and the US were searching for coronavirus updates last March at the start of the pandemic. In Taiwan, Nielsen data showed that the TV audience grew by 1 million to a total viewing population of 21 million in the first weeks of the pandemic. We were all searching for answers, but that also sadly meant that misinformation got accelerated. And so, we were all very confused, weren't we? And that just added to our fear levels of what was real, what was the truth, what was really going on, how, it's left us in a very, distrustful space. So this deficit of trust in news sources from governments and healthcare systems really is creating an opportunity for brands to step in. So think about, you know, transparency is the big message, you know, ingredient transparency, just telling it like it is, no greenwashing. You know, you've got to find and maintain trust with your consumers, and this will drive loyalty. And again, pre-pandemic, we were talking about being very transparent around the steps that brands were taking towards sustainability, because if you're not telling the truth, you will be found out, and you know, it's all over social media immediately, and you lose brand value. Again, that was pre-pandemic. So post-pandemic, transparency and being truthful and honest is such a big key in keeping the loyalty of your consumers. So again, be really clear and honest about your supply chains. Take corporate social responsibility seriously. You know, we saw so much unrest across the globe in terms of Black Lives Matter. We've seen so much around, you know, the supply chain and how people have been treated in the factories. You know, transparency and trust is really not about marketing, but it's really a genuine, necessary area to focus on, so that you know that your consumers are really have the validation from you that that your products are safe. And you know, again, if you're being honest about your sustainability trail, the consumer is going to buy into that and stick with you. So again, this idea of, you know, the most important issues we're making a purchase decision. So this is from our WGSN barometer, and barometer is a product that we collect data information from the US, from the UK, and from Germany, and we do consumer panels. And in asking, you know, what was the most important thing when looking at purchases. So you can see here that the environment, ethical labor, transparency, these are hugely important to the consumer going forward. So COVID-19 has been a real catalyst for change, especially in the fashion sector, because we've seen how much, you know, we've had a really bad name about waste in fashion and landfill. So it's really about looking at, you know, resilience, improving our brands, improving our shareholder values. So, you know, we really need to change in these ways. Sorry, I'm just going to take a drink of water. I'm starting to lose my voice. So opportunities here. You know, open source carrying strategies, safety benefits, sharing safety benefits, you know, again, even if it's down to the types of fabrication, it might be antiviral fabrics, but again, it's, you know, speaking to your consumer about how you can support them and being really, you know, supportive and open and honest. Looking at and talking about the end-to-end transparency in your supply chain. You know, it's so important that people understand where products coming from, the processes that products are going through. Investigate again your sustainability impact from, you know, the entire cycle, from design to manufacturing to end of life. Think about circularity of product. Communicate this to your consumers with labeling or tagging. Now, you know, now we can do it through digitization, where, you know, the product can be tagged and you can actually see the whole depth of where that product has started and where it will go at the end of its life. Direct to consumer communications, you know, again, this idea of products to order, which reduces waste. At the same time, it also connects you with, you know, closer connection with your consumer. And again, by connecting your consumer with your designers, with your makers, gives a face behind the brand. I think it, you know, many companies and brands, and we spoke about this before the pandemic, of how important heritage of a brand is. And, you know, don't forget to tell the story of the heritage of your brand. And that's partly around this idea of connecting with consumers and connecting them with the people that are behind the scenes doing the designing, doing the sourcing, so that there is this real feeling of community. Focus less on hype and deliver a more direct approach, again, describing ingredients, really looking at being, you know, showing the good that's in the product, so that the consumer really understands that you're really thinking about it. Investing with partners, technology brands, implementing blockchain systems. That goes back to the sort of tagging and, you know, following a garment or a product all the way through its supply chain. And lastly here, explore biotechnology for sustainable ingredients and alternatives. So we've seen a huge rise in natural dyes in the apparel world, mycelium fabrics instead of leather, really looking at biotechnology for healthy ingredients in food and drink. Excuse me. And our driver number 5 is around safety fears. So from the global pandemic to social and political unrest, safety and security is really the great demographic and socio-economic unifier. You know, we've seen so much civil unrest across the globe, from Brazil, Hong Kong, Belgium, the States, you know, awful situation in Afghanistan that we've got going on. You know, there have been huge fear factors across the globe. And for citizens around all these regions, we're seeing this rise in collective trauma that, again, makes that sanctuary of the home even more important. It's almost like we've had to, you know, shut down, close the shutters and stay in this place of safety. So safety and security will be this great unifier across the globe. And the safety economy has actually been thriving throughout the pandemic. You know, obviously sales of PPE, hand sanitizers, masks, home cleaning products, you know, we've scrambled to, you know, protect ourselves and our loved ones, but we've also, you know, made sure that our home space is absolutely clean and safe. And you know, we're not going to recover from this for quite some time, and we're still going to have that feeling of you know, the virus out there and where we might pick it up from. So the vaccine rollout, you know, is slow across the globe. Some regions have been very lucky, and it's been a great rollout. And then there's other regions around the world that are still waiting. So distance and hygiene are still quite synonymous with safety. You know, we don't know how many variants will be coming. You know, this is something that we're certainly going to have to continue to live with. You know, certainly still in stores, in offices, on public transport, there's a limited capacity. You know, in our office, we've still got the 2-meter distance between desks, so we've only got 50% capacity in the office, but even that 50% capacity isn't being used up because people are still quite worried about coming out. The heightening of sanitization, you know, we're all experiencing different post-pandemic ways of this road to recovery. But there are positive signs that people are returning to the simple pleasures. So people are beginning to come out, and, you know, I went to a restaurant just earlier in the week. I'm doing more shopping. We're doing a little bit more socializing. We still want more elbow room. And we're certainly not sharing dishes, and we're not, having sharing platters. But, we're slowly coming out of it. So, the physical safety isn't just tied to the pandemic. Again, with that idea of the social unrest, there was, layers and layers of fear of how society was changing. So, this rise of collective trauma, again, making that home sanctuary so much more important. And we are seeing a big spend in that as well, in terms of building that sanctuary. And the home hub economy is going to continue to thrive. So think about products that are going to make us feel protected and secure. Offering comfort and reassurance, again, everyone is really focusing on the home. The big DIY stores have had a huge rise since the pandemic. So people are redecorating. People are certainly spending a huge amount more time in their gardens. We've seen the rise of the kind of home garden and growing your own vegetables. Even people that have been in flats who only have balconies have learned how to grow vegetables, have learned how to grow climbing vegetables. So we've seen this real focus on the home, on furniture, on redecoration, and a huge spend on, the patio area or the balcony that has been kind of redecorated and had an awning put over, so it almost becomes an extension of the home. And again, it's where we're working from. We're doing everything. We're doing, work, rest, and play. So, again, we've seen the rise of indoor plants, and, brands should really try and tap into this idea of domestic cozy products that really enhance comfort and create this sense of cocooning. I've talked a lot about texture and softness of fabrics. And again, that was pre-pandemic. And now it's more important than ever that what we're touching and what we're surrounding ourselves with is really, really soft. But at the same time, we want it to be antimicrobial, antiviral. So there's lots of areas that are ripe for innovation here. And even in terms of, reconnecting with nature by way of bringing plants indoors or spending more time out in the garden. So again, that huge movement of grow your own. And that links in with all the home cooking and, so this really, think about how you can offer reassurance in this area of the home hub. So again, look at where you can add value. Certainly the idea of that, out in apparel, it could be outerwear and activewear, tapping into the domestic cozy aesthetic. Again, not, furniture, apparel, slippers, footwear, food that nourishes us and almost that sort of nursery food that makes us feel so good. Again, antimicrobial and antiviral qualities that can come into product. Blue light filters that protect our skin. We've spent so much time on screen that, really think about skincare, makeup ranges that, again, are going to give us that kind of glow when we're still on the Zoom calls. Creating products that encourage support in gardening, in plant care. My husband has grown 5 avocado plants from the pips of the avocado seeds of all the avocados. I had to stop him. He was starting to grow an avocado farm in our house. I'm like, enough. But it brought him great joy to do this little bit of growing. But again, also think about plant-based proteins. We are seeing a big shift away from the meat eaters and a massive rise in vegetarianism and veganism, which of course lends itself hugely across to becoming more healthy and more fit. So that brings us to the end. Adapt, innovate, evolve. The uncertainty of the coming years are going to require businesses to be really light on their feet, adapt products and services to meet these new needs of consumers in this ever-changing coronavirus landscape. And again, we don't know how long it's going to be before we come out of this. So we're just going to have to adjust our lives to coexist with the virus. And consumer values are evolving, and the strategies that we cover in looking at the value shift hopefully have offered you a bit of a roadmap to align with. So again, think about fostering wellness, building community, championing transparency, offering reassurance. The times are tough, but we need these opportunities to build bridges and to help us to kind of navigate through. So we'll leave you with the idea that there is going to be a better tomorrow, and we need to be optimistic around that. I hope you found this all very useful. And before I finish, looking at this, which is really based on I don't have the name of the person who put it together, but this is the phases that one goes through when going through grief. And we've all been through it. So phase one was the fear and the panic, the initial period when COVID-19 disrupted our lives so hugely. And, we experienced a lot of anger, a lot of phobia. So there was the fear and the panic. We then moved on to sort of phase two, where we went to find refuge and adapt to that new reality. And we looked into nostalgia for a bit of safety and a bit of reassurance. And we changed how we worked, how we played, how we communicated. And then we've moved through this period of, what have we learned from it? We start to see new ways of doing things, new ways of education, new ways of buying, care in the community. Our personal values are so much different now post-pandemic. And now phase four, where we really need to look at new value systems, where we really want to emerge, commit, and start to build a stronger economy that will prioritize collective good and really bring forward a future that has hope and optimism. So again, hopefully I've given you lots of opportunities to think about this value shift. So thank you very much. That's the end. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Kim. That was a beautiful, very enlightening presentation. But I know we've taken up a lot of your time, but may I just request for you to stay a second more so we can have a photo opportunity? I would like to invite the Executive Director of the Design Center of the Philippines, Ms. Ria Matute, to join us for this photo op, please.
Hi, Kim.
Hi there. I hope there's lots of information there, and
lots to unpack.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm sure many people will agree with much of what I went over, but looking at those drivers are the new ways for opportunity. If we bear that in mind and look towards optimism and build community amongst the consumers.
Yes. No, I'm sure they'll go back to our Facebook page and rewatch everything that you shared with them. So, it's definitely a lot to think about, but and a lot to be optimistic about as well.
Yes. Yeah.
The valuable information.
Good. It was a pleasure.
Ladies, may I ask for your biggest smile so we can have this photo? Let's do this in 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you very much. Once again, that was Miss Kim Manino over in London. Thank you so much for joining us today.
A pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your time. It sounds really exciting.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you very much to Miss Ria for joining us as well. We will see a lot more of Miss Ria a little bit later on, but let's move on, shall we? Oh my, we will reserve the poll question for a little bit later on because I know you're already excited for this next part. We're going to keep it locked in here because we have this gentleman from Dark Matter Labs coming right up. Of course, I'm talking about Indy Johar. As our team prepares the stage, let me just take this moment to thank our partners. That's Adobo Magazine, British Council, HK Walls, Shoney Projects, and Chasing Coral. Thank you for supporting Design Futures. The future is now. We are just about done setting up for Indy's session. Actually, let's have it right now. Our next speaker is Indy Johar, co-founder of Project 00, a collaborative studio of architects, strategic designers, programmers, social scientists, economists, and urban designers practicing design beyond its traditional borders. And most recently, Dark Matter Labs, a field laboratory focused on radically redesigning the bureaucratic and institutional infrastructure of our cities, regions, and towns for a more democratic, distinguished, or distributed great transition. His session is entitled Futuristic Designs and Strategic Leadership, where he will share his journey of change, learning, innovation, and desire to create positive impact, as well as the importance of having a design mindset to achieve these things. Everyone, let's welcome to the IDC 2021 stage, Indy Johar. Hi, Indy.
Hello, how are you? That was a bit.
I am good.
That
Welcome
was a big
to.
build up.
Pardon?
That was a big build up. I hope I don't disappoint.
No, not at all. I'm pretty sure that was just perfect for you. Welcome to the Philippine virtual stage. If we were not in the situation that we are in, you would literally be in the Philippines and on our stage. But please let our audience know, where are you streaming in from?
I'm streaming in from London actually today, so I'm delighted to be here. I know there's been a couple of opportunities to come over to the Philippines, so I look forward to that in the future. But I'm delighted to be here and delighted to contribute to this conversation.
We appreciate you spending your Friday morning with us because I know it is morning on your end now. Before I turn over the stage to you, I would just like to once again remind our audience to comment their questions, ideas, opinions, or send them through our inbox so that our team can cue them later on for our fireside chat with Indy. I'll catch up with everyone later on, but for now, the virtual stage is all yours, Indy.
That's very kind. So I'm going to invite us to take a bit of a breath and go on a little journey with me. And I'm going to propose it to you that I come at this at a stage that I think we're facing one of the largest transitions in society that we've ever seen, probably in the last 400 years from a civilization perspective. And that transition is a structural transition. It's not just a transition of things, but it's a fundamental transition in how we see the world. And that has great implications for design and the leadership of design itself. So I want to start there. And I want to start by saying that actually our perception, our ideas of design have been constructed in a very particular age. Most of our ideas of design have been constructed through an idea of objects, subjects, perspectives, the objectification of the world. These things are ways that we have seen and organized the world. And I think some of those fundamentals are transitioning and transforming. So I'm going to take us down a little bit of a philosophical path, but to then bring us back to some reality. Just to give some context to this, Dark Matter Labs, we're a team of about now 55 people from around the world, from Vancouver to South Korea. We're a distributed network studio with full-time, this is near full-time people. And we are a team that looks at how do you build new institutions, how do you design and build new institutional qualities. And I'll explain a little bit about that later. And, you know, literally from, as was being said, kind of data scientists to policy people to tech UX designers. So what we have talked about is design has to be at the synthesis of multiple capabilities. So more and more, one of the key things for me is how do you build a polymathic studio, a studio with polymathic capabilities, which I think are essential for 21st century design. We could talk about this in our Q&A questions after this. A little bit of my history, I've been part of building many things, fortunately, whether it's from building Architecture 00, which is an architectural organization based out in London, to OpenDesk, open source furniture company, to multiple impact hubs, and was one of the global directors in 2011 at the kind of design stage of the impact hub network. WikiHouse, open source housing, and of course Dark Matter Labs. So just to give a quality, I mean, we're part of building social action structures. So we have a history of building things. That's been largely my history, is that design and building new types of institutions and organizations. WikiHouse, open source housing, furniture. So the thing that became very clear to us as we were building many of these things was that underneath the world that we were building, the open source furniture or the housing, there were a whole bunch of structural questions which were undesigned or we felt were unconsidered. So in many parts of the world where we talk, everyone says there's a housing shortage and they talk about housing. And we end up building smaller and smaller housing. Architects do better and better job in building smaller and smaller housing. But actually the problem isn't housing. The problem is our organization of land and how land is organized. So one of the things we started to realize was that there was a kind of idea of the dark matter, the stuff that sits underneath the objects we make. So whether it's open source housing, it's not just about land, it's also about how do we financialize housing and the quality assurance mechanisms. So we can create these open source products. So we're really interested in how do you democratize our capability to build a city? How do you democratize that? But also behind that is an underlying thing, which is how do you build the institutional infrastructures? And I'm going to go into that, so I'll unpack this, so be patient with me on this. So, but I want to start in a kind of very particular way. I think that for design to be relevant, we need to re-embrace the scale of the challenge that we're in the middle of. And this goes back to the beginning of my conversation, which is that I think we're in a world-shifting moment. And too much of design is obsessed by, let's say, comforting the old. Whereas actually, if you look at where we're headed, we're almost likely headed to 2.7 to 3.2 degrees temperature change, which almost certainly in terms of global north, global south has massive implications. Now, if you marry that reality with the reality that 78% of S&P 100s would, I think, be unviable if they had to account for social and environmental costs. It means the products and the things we're making are fundamentally wrong, not tinkering wrong, not evolutionary wrong, but almost structurally wrong. Now, that means that our future products and things are made in a fundamentally different way. It means we're going to move from a material economy to an intangibles economy. The value of intangibles will become more critical. We're going to move from a waste economy to a biomaterial circular economy. We're going to almost certainly move from a circular economy only to actually also durable economy. So how to build products which are deeply durable. What is an economy of a durable product in terms of repair, refit, all those things? And then we're also going to move to building actually a regenerative base layer of a naturally ecological economy, a nature-based regenerative base layer economy. And then also fundamentally, we have to start to think about a rare earth economy. So all of these economies are different and they interact in the world and they will create a whole new class of products and a whole new class of thinking. So it's worth, when we start to look at the transition of the future, to start to imagine what these things look like. Now, a durable economy can work in the idea of ownership to a degree, whereas actually a circular economy can't. It has to be actually the materials almost have to be held independently from a traditional ownership economy. An intangibles economy can be lots about intangible ownership, NFTs and other things. So what you've got is a nature-based economy perhaps has to transcend the theory of ownership and be entreated with. So these economies have fundamentally different characteristics and thereby fundamentally different relationships to the world. And I think one of the things I sort of talk about more and more is that actually we are going to see this sort of scale of structural transition. And it's worth us recognizing what the scale of what we're talking about. So 96% of mammals on Earth are livestock and humans. So 4% are wild animals. That's kind of elephants, zebras. That's 4%. So actually, the anthropological landscape is massive. Wild landscape is minimal increasingly. So we have to start to actually reconcile and understand the externalities that we're generating and the implications of that, and reconsider those. And this has happened in a very short period of time. So if you look at what we've done since the 1970s, 60% of animal populations wiped out in the last 50 years. And I think that's still accelerating. At the same time, and as was being eloquently said by Kim, we're in a massive transformation of kind of, I would say, COVID has revealed things to us. The fragility of our existing system, supply chains around the world, actually accelerating systemic injustices between the rich and the poor. The rich were able to live in nice houses and gardens and whereas other things, and people that didn't have the capacity, actually the systemic injustices have been significant, both in terms of the impact on children, the impact on actually household violence, all sorts of things that happened. At the same time, we know that actually our global interdependence has become much more clearer. We cannot isolate, and although the West is trying to do this, but there's no way to isolate this problem to one location. Actually, we have to deal with it in an integrated way. But this requires a different type of global coordination that we've never been used to. And then it's about reconfiguring our relationship. The household, the nature of our house, nature of work has fundamentally changed. And I would posit that this is a herald, the beginning of a long age of emergencies. COVID is just the beginning, and climate change effects, which many of you know, whether it's in sort of food crops all the way through to heat effects, to storms, flooding, heat island effects in cities, all sorts of things that are going to be manifesting in significant ways. And these risks are cascading. So when we look at this world, these are cascading risks. And why I bring this up is that only when we start to understand these cascading risks, we understand how we have to change and the scale of change that's on the table. So, the stress that's been caused has been cascading all the way down to how we live our lives and how we operationalize ourselves. And many people are saying, we're going to go back to the office. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we're going to go back to the office one day a week, and that's all that's going to happen. And that's okay. But in order for that to be okay, our cities have to be fit for purpose. So the question is, are we seeing a more fundamental shift in our theory of how we organize, value our economic geography? And this goes back to my previous point about intangible economies. So I think one of the big things we're going to see is the growth of intangible assets. Intangible assets are like networks. The goodwill of your brand is an intangible asset. The goodwill or the trust or the participation in a collective design process, that's an intangible asset. And what we're seeing is intangible assets growing as their share of value. And as designers, I think we have to talk more and more about how we work with intangible assets rather than just tangible assets. Intangible assets of a startup, for example, a tech startup, can be nearly 80% of the value of that organization. So as designers, what's our role in understanding these intangible assets and really materializing them becomes very, very clear. At the same time, I think we have to start to understand, and this is for the architects and urbanists around us, is that for all the want of other things that we talk about in terms of DeFi, distributed finance, various other things, land is becoming a mechanism to extract value in an intangible world. So as the assets become more and more intangible, land becomes the mechanism to extract value or hold value. So wealth economy is increasingly linked to land, and land reform is going to be critical as part of that. At the same time, we're seeing a massive we're about to see a massive transformation in automation and things. So automation is going to transform us. Now, it can be a source of threat, i.e. the destruction of jobs, or it can be a source of liberation. It's a source of liberation if we can do the human investment to actually build a new human economy. 21st century cities, in our view, are going to be less and less about numbers of people growing, not going from 10 million to 15 million. It's going to be about how 10 million people become more effective. You unlock the collective intelligence of 10 million people. You unlock the collective welfare of 10 million people, their thriving, their mental health. These intangibles are actually the real asset of the 21st century, and they're collective assets, not individual assets. So how do you create the conditions for this new 21st century economy? That means the role of physical design of cities is less about shiny towers. It's actually about our ability to unlock these intangible assets, this kind of thriving growth model, as opposed to the material growth model. And that sits in the context of these things. And I think this is where, as designers, we have to recognize our role is to design at a systemic level, whether it's actually nutrition decline, entrenching quality, labor market automation. These things are transforming everything around us, and they will do increasingly with shocks. We know that as a result of climate change, we're going to see something in the region of about 26% loss, or up to 20% loss in nutrition value in global south. So what does that do to actually how we start to think about the future of food is going to be one of the biggest interesting and transformative issues that we've got on our table. And I want to put this in context that I think these things are already happening. So it has been posited that Syria as a crisis was one of the first crises of climate change where actually farmers could not farm on their land and thereby had to go to urban environments, and that destabilized many of the things around us. So we're going to see large-scale transitions, and what's the role of designers in that future become really clear. The cause and effects of these things are non-linear. The crises have cascading crises. The Syrian crisis didn't go from rural to urban, it went to rural to urban to international. And the implications are still being felt. And there's no single simplistic villain. Actually, this is a key issue. There's no single simplistic villain. There's no single simplistic intervention in that theory. So what does change look like in a complex world when actually the problems are non-linear? The problem of fixing housing supply is not just actually about smaller housing. Actually, it requires us to look at the system of interventions. What is the role of designers when we look at those system interventions? This is a portfolio of obesity impacts. So when you look at the system of kind of all the drivers of obesity, you realize that obesity cannot be resolved by one intervention. How do we drive change in that future? And the system is not flat. It cascades. It has a topography of effects. How do we start to operate in that way? And it's also evident that actually we are generating risks for future citizens, and actually the future not only are we generating risks for future generations, terminating them, and actually there are risks present that are manifest of the future as well. So we have to look at risk in a symmetrical sense. And I think that's a really key thing. And I think unless we start to understand the implications we're creating for future generations, it becomes very, very, very difficult to move forward. So when we start to look at this, I think one of the roles of designers is to start to talk about these large-scale transitions. So when we talk about a historic model, our current economy is, we perceive the human as an economic agent, homo economos. You're incentivized by external incentives, more money, more reward, whatever. Now that is a model which relies on extrinsic incentives, i.e. incentives outside you. That means that actually markets are effectively giving you reward, and that's the incentive for you to do something. So you're instrumentalized by external actors. Now, in order to make that possible, there is a theory to say that in order to make that economy possible, you have to make people precarious. So the more precarious they are, the more easy it is for them to be externally organized by what jobs there are out there, right? And that's constructed our theory of labor, that's constructed our theory of education, that's constructed many of the logics. Now, in the 21st century, one of the big challenges is that our extrinsic organization is great for procedural work. It's great when you know what you want someone to do, you tell them what you want them to do, and they do it, right? It's a kind of procedural work. But if you move into a kind of a theory of work, which is about care, craft, creativity, cognition, complexity, that isn't extrinsically motivated. That's actually intrinsically motivated and intrinsically designed. So how do we create the landscape, the foundations for a new economic reality, which isn't about extrinsic motivation? How do we create these social infrastructures for that new economy? I think will be one of the big things. So when we start to talk about design here becomes actually our capacity to actually create new relationships between incentives, economics, and institutional landscapes. How do we operationalize those things? How do we build in uncertainty? And it's clear that when we look into these futures, what becomes clear is that we can respond to known crises, respond to crises that are knowable. We can build capacities to actually deal with crises that are likely. And then there is a question about how we build the capacity to deal with unknown risks. And these are fundamentally different types of things, right? Now, how do we build that foundational capacity? How do we build the capacity for society to actually sense make these civic risks? How do you build the capacity to actually build legitimacy about the sense making and understanding? And how do you build a devolution of response and solutioneering in a complex system? Because this isn't about centrally imposed ideas. It is about how a system responds in multidimensional failures. Now, that requires us to understand something structural, that actually some of the deep root problems in looking at complex problems that I think we're facing and complex design challenges is that actually the root problems are about this, that we've siloed our decision-making capacity. So that so for example, preventative impacts of healthcare are not really in the hands of the health department. They're actually in the hands of all sorts of transportation departments and other departments. So how do we start to think about decision-making capacity? The instrumentalization of actually centralized simple solutions rather than actually building the capacity. The lack of accountability mechanisms. Our incentive systems are badly designed to actually create perverse outcomes. And the lack of adequate representation, both of future generations, but also non-human systems. So short-termism in our framework, all these things become really clear, and the lack of shared languages. So when we start to look in this future, the creation, what we're seeing is a creation of runaway causal loops. And I would argue that climate change is a symptom of a failure of our failure to govern ourselves. And that's generating externalities, which are now feedbacking on itself. So if we're going to talk about design, and design increasingly from our perspective is operating not just at the physical object level, but actually diagonally across this into supply chains, into sort of new theories of governance. So we call these system demonstrators. How do you reimagine a product, but also reimagine it into the system that exists in order to be able to scale the level of effect? And it's about us recognizing these system demonstrators across multiple agents. This is a collaborative process. It requires us to work diagonally all the way through these things. And that's why our teams are multidimensional teams. And it requires us to understand that we're responding to molecular, non-linear, invisible, and micro threats, right? Whereas our governance systems are not designed around that. And these deep code design issues are really structural. So whereas our symptoms are all sorts of chronic illness, loneliness, heat-island effects, underlying issues are much more structural. They're, for example, trees. A tree is seen as an urban tree is seen as a liability in terms of maintenance and insurance costs. So actually, unless you reimagine understanding the value of an urban tree on the balance sheet of government, the trees don't exist. We can keep drawing them, but we are drawing the wrong thing without understanding those systemic issues. And this requires portfolio-based responses. This requires innovation at multiple teams working together to drive an outcome of change. And underneath it are all sorts of issues that need to be sitting together. How we procure property rights, reimagining property rights, reimagining company structures, accounting systems. Thermodynamic accounting changes how we build, what we imagine, what we conserve. And also our theory of social norms, the social memetics to which we operate. So it is in this context that I think we can start to see what I would talk about as a boring revolution. How do we start to imagine it? I'm going to start to speed up a little bit in cognition of time. Many of you will recognize this as the High Line in New York. But one of the interesting things is we did the work around the High Line, where we looked at the land value uplift attributable to the High Line. And what we found out was that you could have paid for the High Line in under 10 months if you just took 10% of the land value uplift and shared it. So we started to talk about how do you build the smart covenant in that framework? How do you build that contract which actually allows for the sharing of that land value uplift? Now that covenant means that you can pay for civic goods in new ways. So we create a new economy, a civic economy of many, where the benefits that are attributed are shared back to create new economies. So increasingly the work that we're doing is looking at this civic infrastructure and new ways of actually building the many-to-many value models behind it, because we think that's the underlying issue to be able to build many of these things. And that looks at all the issues of tokenization and unbundling of property rights in smart ways, and how do you start to unbundle them for new forms of value, and how that materially starts to change the nature of design, how that recognizes the impact of poor housing on healthcare in the UK. So the value of the house is not the tradable value of the house. It's also the spillover value that, in terms of healthcare costs, education costs if it's overcrowded, all the way through to supply chain costs, maintenance value. So when you look at the house through this systems level value, you start to perceive it in a completely different way, and the economy of the house is transformed. And again, we're seeing this system level approach all the way to $1 million blocks. So, which was done in Chicago, where they looked at the reoffending rates of urban blocks. So actually the cost to state as a result of reoffending, and what were the $1 million blocks. And they took those $1 million in terms of reoffending rates and the cost and the penal system of people going to jail, and reinvested them in actually supporting urban renewal and supporting people getting their lives back. So how do we start to shift this idea of real estate and real value all the way from the design cost, which is 0.1, but the total cost emission can be something like 80 times that, excluding the local multiplier. So this starts to reframe the theory of design and its leverage, not in the product, but the outcomes and the effects that it generates. Next, it's really important we change our relationship. There's a talk I'm doing later today on actually reimagining our relationship with the world. And more, we have to recognize most of our governance models and how we design things are based around actually rule-based systems. How do we start to talk about machine rule systems? What does that open up? New ways of thinking, machine-to-machine systems and machine-to-ecological systems. What do these futures of governance models open up in terms of new ways of unlocking? We're doing work in Daegu City right now in South Korea, which is looking at how do you create the permissioning landscape of public realm. So a digital permissioning landscape where you can effectively, if you want to be an on-street vendor, you can actually real-time ask to be an on-street vendor on a digital platform application that you are. And that creates a whole new economy of actually how you use public realm, but also govern ourselves in really smart ways. And this allows us to start to think of governance in a fundamentally different way. Our current theories of governance are loosely bounded. How do we start to think? And the technology is increasingly tightly bounded. So if you take your car and you drive it down a street, it's very near, I think within the next 3 years, there are laws going into play which say the car won't be able to drive more than the speed limit. It physically won't be able to drive. It's got digital limiters on it. Now, is that a good way? Is that the way we want to do centralized control? Or do we want to create an ennobling architecture? We know with many AI, machine-assisted learning capacities, actually ennobling, helping people make better decisions is a better route to control. So there's a really fundamental question about how we govern and interact in the world that's going to be asked in this format. And that has implications for lots of things around licensing, governance, of how we govern our cities, how we coexist. And at the same time, this goes all the way through to the products that we make. This is WikiHouse and what we've been doing with the WikiHouse, to how do we start to create, we're designing a self-sovereign house, a house that owns itself. How do you start to organize that? What is the frameworks to be able to do that? And that invites us to think about these things in a fundamentally different way and organize these values. How do you start to think about from competition to non-rivalrous economics? A forest and the value of a forest cannot be deemed through competition. It must be understood in relationship with each other. This has fundamental implications of how we see common goods and common assets and the values they generate and the values they create and contribute. How do we start to price them and understand that? That again is critical. So what you're seeing from us is that we are not seeing design as an object design. We're seeing design as a thesis goes between the object design, the contract, and the financing, and sees it as an ecological system that sits across that. And that goes beyond all of these things into new forms of actually governance instruments at a structural level. And all of this stuff requires portfolios of change, portfolios of multiple interventions. Now, I'm going to give you an example that what the role of time dimension is really critical. So what's really clear is that most of our, say, health outcomes are focused on failure to treat, i.e. not doing any treatment, the cost of treatment. The cost of prevention is less than 2%, but prevention requires systemic intervention. And thriving is the unlocking of actually 20 or 30 years more life and good quality life, the impact of thriving. Now, every one of these interventions has a different scale of intervention, a different economy, and a different governance model. So as designers, we often live in the treatment world. Prevention is very difficult to deliver. We draw it often, but it's very difficult to deliver because we don't have the economics and the governance mechanisms like that. And thriving is virtually never imagined. So if we want to start to create these futures, we have to start to expand the theory of design to actually operate across that and build these sort of radical portfolios all the way through. So many of what I said there is actually making an advocacy. I'm advocating that actually as designers, we need to start to think about the boring dimensions around our world. So the future of how we license things, the future of how we contract between things, the future of how we construct policy, the future of rights. These things are coming together to transform how we are. But I think all of this stuff sits at one fundamental position, which is, I would say, is a 21st century human condition, reimagining who we are. Every time design and art has started to look at the future, it has started to look at the future by actually reimagining who we are as individuals. And what I propose it to you is that we are they. I am a plurality. You are a plurality. We are they. I am a biological multitude. I have multiple contextual identities. I am a confluence of a fluidity of identities and personalities. At a quantum material level, I am fully entangled. At a brain, I am entangled with all my networks around me. It is not my brain, but actually a social brain. Now, when you start to look at the world through understanding yourself in this way, you start to have a paradigm question about how we exist. With terms of epigenetics, we know that actually the impacts of poverty and famine are seen 2 generations down the line as a result of its impacts on epigenetics. We know even scarcity, so financial scarcity, deteriorates IQ and mental decision-making capacity. We know we're a biological multitude. Your gut, the food that you're eating affects your mood and even your cognitive capabilities. We know long-term emotional scars have inheritable genetic changes to you. So what is the violence that we're producing? We know this molecular violence exists all the way through to our cortisone levels and actually has significant effects on our long-term capabilities in terms of our life rates. So when we start to understand ourselves through these lenses, it becomes clear that a deeper change is required. And this is where I say that the deeper change for me is going beyond the world conversations that we're having. The science and the policy of reimagining ourselves invites us to reimagine ourselves in different ways. And I'm coming to an end. I suppose what I want to put down on the table here as designers is I think we're fundamentally at a transition space between who we are and how we imagine ourselves. And the science of that is already there, but it also means that our relationship with things around us, so I would argue that ownership is just an extension of servitude, and it's an old world idea. We have to be in stewardship with things. We have to be in treaty with things. And increasingly, that relationship is going to be transformed. Employment contracts largely are contracts of servitude. They aren't contracts of collaboration. Actually, we spend most of our time not being able to say what we want to say, because that's what employment does. These are old models of control, old models of actually ownership. Our relationship with the future is that one of, again, control. But we do not have a thesis for long-termism. We don't have a mechanism for actually thinking longitudinally, intergenerationally. At the same time, I think we're in an age of discovery. So I think what I want to say is that I think if we recognize the depth of transformation that we're seeing in ourselves and who we are, because we're not singular objects, we're interdependent, we're fully interdependent with the world around us. We have to recognize and reimagine our relationship to the world. It cannot be about servitude, but must be about being in treaty with, both with the present and the future, both with humans and non-humans. That requires a foundational transition. And that opens up all the way through our theory of human development, all our theory of health, increasingly a series of One Health, all the way through to actually looking at our relationship with the future. Persistent cells, how do we persist into the future? What is our relationship with the future? All the way to persistent things. What if a thing desires to persist? How do we create democracies that are able to look at the long term? How do we recognize, instead of organizations being abstracted and isolated from the world, as private limited companies are, but we recognize our entanglement? How do we operate into those things? These are fundamental questions that I think will change the nature of design. It changes our nature with trees around us. We recognize trees as a liability. We do not understand all their societal benefits, which are heat-on effects, sustainable urban drainage, carbon dioxide, microbiomes, all sorts of secondary effects, which are unvalued in our economy because we don't perceive them in a complete way. And our theories of property all the way through to actually some of the deep transitions. So as I come to an end, I suppose my invitation to us all is that I think design is changing, but what is fundamentally changing is our relationship with the world and our relationship with the future, our relationship with nature, our relationship with humans, our relationship with things. Things will become self-sovereign. Nature, there's many projects going on around the world where rivers are becoming self-sovereign. I think our future has to be not colonized, but actually be able to work with. We cannot be terminating future generations. This is a new redefinition of our relationship with the world. And in that, design changes. Everything changes by design as well. And we have to address our legacy lock-ins, our perception of self and how we perceive ourselves and how we construct the perception of self consistently in design, how we design our organizations for intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic incentives. How do we reimagine our deep code structures like property rights, employment laws in really radical forms? And how do we free ourselves from the lock-ins to these realities becomes really critical. So with that, I'm going to end, but thank you all for listening, and hopefully we can have a few questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that session, Indy. That was quite a lot to take in. Thank you for spending time. Now, we are giving you a bit of time to catch your breath, maybe have a drink of water before your fireside chat. Like you said, you're looking forward to the questions. Lai will take care of that. But for now, I will give you a little bit of a break. Is that okay?
Thank you.
All right. But we will be checking in with you again a few minutes from now. For now, I did promise to talk about our poll. So let us do that, shall we? Earlier, we asked you a poll question. And the poll question is, what are people spending more money and time on? Again, that was, what are people spending more money and time on? Plants, healthy food, C, a space makeover, or D, Netflix? So we already have the results. Let's show it, team. What did we get? What do we have? So nobody spent money on plants. It was only me. Well, too bad I didn't get to answer the poll. So evidently, a majority are spending on healthy food, 55%, a little more than half. And then space makeovers at 36% and Netflix with 9%. All right. So I guess I'm the only plantita who is joining us at the event right now. Thank you very much for sending that in. Back to our program and on to our fireside chat. We will be joined by the head Arts and Creative Industries, Philippines and Southeast Asia Creative Hubs for Good Program interim lead for British Council, or of the British Council. She will be engaging in this conversation with Indy and discuss some of the questions that you've sent over in our inbox and comments. Please welcome Lai Del Rosario.
Hello. Hi, Indy. Good morning and good evening to everyone watching from the Philippines. I'm Lai. My name is Lai, and I'm very happy to be interviewing Indy for this conference. And thank you, by the way, to our partners at the Design Center of the Philippines for bringing us in to their program. Indy, I just wanted to, I guess, kind of have my summarized take on your presentation, because there was a lot to unpack there, and over a very short period of time. So yeah, okay. The first, I think that what I got from the presentation is the changing role of designers in society, right? And also the changing role of the way designers should be seeing their relationship with the world. Um, and I think I have some follow up questions on that. And I think we can go over the questions based on the key points that I think I got from you. The second is how our economies are producing the wrong things, or basically how economies are producing things that are failing the earth, and thus we have things like climate change. The third is the importance of governance to redesign these systems, right? And then the last that I got is the need to embrace interdependencies, to see interdependencies as ways to kind of work together, to force us to work together almost, and not as bureaucracy, and not as something that will slow things down. And of course, the need to embrace our interdependencies with nature, and to create deep change, right? So I guess to go back a little bit, you mentioned that you're an architect by training. And we have a lot of people watching here who are also probably architects, young designers. I just wanted to ask you how your training as an architect influence your perspectives now and your work now.
Fundamentally, I think for me, the big thing about being a designer or an architect is that I think you're trained to be propositional. You're trained to not only analyze things, but to propose things in bleak ways. So I think designers are trained to synthesize across multiple disciplines and multiple contexts. And that, I think, is a unique contribution that designers can make in a way that actually is really powerful. And I think one of the things that I learned very quickly was that as an architect, you work across multiple materials, legal frameworks, policy frameworks to design things. And the reality is that we work as systems. We work across these systems to create synthesis of a knot of value. And where that knot includes finance and other things it's just an idea of how we do stuff. I mean, I was fortunate that we ended up doing, we built the Bristol Urban Beach with Melissa Mean. We built things. We were part of building impact hubs. So not just as designers, but actually as entrepreneurs. So I think design entrepreneurship becomes a really critical manifestation point in an age of complexity. I think one of the biggest challenges for designers right now is that in an age of complexity, there's no one procuring these things. No one goes there and goes, I would like this degree of uncertainty. So actually, one of the key things for designers, right, is to be co-entrepreneurs with our partners. So we have to go from being consultants to be co-entrepreneurs in these sort of problems. So that's been really the journey for me, is actually the kind of co-entrepreneurship aspect, but also fundamentally actually recognizing as designers we synthesize across complex systems. And that's a key thing. So as a designer, the other aspect of it is to think philosophically. I think most of the 21st century in this age is going to be about philosopher makers. How do you philosophize and understand new ways of seeing something and able to construct new ways of making it? And that is really critical.
Yeah. How do you think the role or architects and designers are changing right now? Are they changing in your view?
In my view, they're changing significantly. But on one hand, I think design is becoming, I think it's really where you are. Design is becoming marginal on one side, it's becoming packaging, synthetic, outside. And in other places, it's becoming deep. And I think that we're seeing this bifurcation of design. So, and whereas the demand for what I would call systems design or working at the edge of complexity is massively growing. We as a team have more than doubled over COVID. So the kind of demand, and it's not, it's working all the way from, like I say, from South Korea to Vancouver, literally all over. So the demand for this is growing in really radical ways. But I think it does require new competencies. And it isn't about just designers, it's about sort of what I'd call a design studio, which means that you need more polymathic capabilities in that studio in a way that we've never seen. So a whole team of architects can't do this work.
Yeah. You also talked about, the profitability of big companies, that they're only profitable because they're not spending enough on the things that matter or that are meant to sustain the earth, right?
So no, I was being more fundamental than that. I think most of the things that they're creating aren't viable. Like as in,
the things
if
that
they
they're
have to,
creating.
yeah,
Yeah.
most of the things that we have around us are just not viable. As in, if you were to price food costs, and we will eventually have to price that food cost unless we terminate ourselves as a civilization. The price of carbon, I think the price of carbon per ton, if it is not amortized, if you don't put a depreciation rate on it, is effectively something like $27,000. It's massive. So if you look at the true liabilities of a ton of carbon and what the impacts are, it's massive. So I think we're not pricing these things in yet. Currently we're at sort of 25, 27 euros a ton. Some people are talking about 100. Some people are talking about carbon capture at 500. When you start to price these things in, our economy fundamentally changes. The goods that we have around us fundamentally change. The shoes that we have fundamentally change. And it isn't a small thing, it's a fundamental thing about how the cost of logistics will change most of our food products. All sorts of things will be transformed. And food prices, for example, will more than double most likely. Historically, food has almost been 20% of a person's salary. Actually, we've seen it go down to about 9 to 10% in the Western world. And we'll see it double, if not more. So we're already seeing food price fluctuations around the world, and our predicted energy price fluctuations are massively happening. So we're in the middle of a bit of a transition with structural implications.
Yeah. You talked about, how we need to transition from a tangible economy to an intangible economy. What does an intangible economy look like? And how do you think that will affect the design sector, or the role of designers, or what they should be creating?
Yes, I think the intangible economy is significant. I mean, obviously, you would say that, all the stuff that we're seeing on the digital landscape, but I also think it's about, the value of co-designing something. That's part of an intangible asset. So it's not even the physical product, the social process of construction and design has massive value. So I think, the role of care in society, the role of human functions will become more and more valuable. So we're going to shift. Actually the production of value to more and more of those intangibles. If you would argue, if you go to a very good coffee shop in anywhere, you can pay £3.50 in London for a coffee, right? But the reality is that coffee is probably costing 20 pence. So the other £3.20 is all about the craft of making that coffee there, in particular, in person. So that the value, most of the value of that product is not material cost of coffee, which is cheap still. It may not be cheap in the future, but currently it still is. So this is actually layering on that as intangibles becomes really critical. And I think we're going to see the revaluing of intangibles around our products as a key thing. So it won't just be about pure intangibles, but the intangible value around the products that we create becoming more and more valuable, the products and the material economy shrinking. We have to shrink the material economy whilst we grow the intangibles economy.
That's really interesting. And I think, coming from when we're talking about a country like the Philippines, where, it's, there's still a lot of product-based, economies. And it suggests a different way of valuing one's work, right? That you actually value the knowledge, ideas, and tangible culture. So yeah, would you care to add some more?
And the social experience and the participation and the kind of emotional relationship, all these intangibles become really valuable. And I think increasingly that's going to be a key part of the story of how we make things.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I want to go to climate change because a lot of your presentation was really about kind of illustrating how economies are impacting the earth. And I remembered another speaker that we had in another event called Cameron Tonkin Weiss. He was talking about climate change as either a problem that's too big, meaning that, it's too big a problem. We have no control, we have no power to change anything. Or a problem that's too small, meaning whatever we do, it will be irrelevant, right? So where do you think we should start when we talk about creating deep change? And of course, like responding to climate change.
I think the problem of climate change is actually a problem of how we see ourselves in the world. I think we see ourselves, we have separated ourselves from the world. We have a relationship with the world. We perceive things through the theory of ownership and abstraction. I think if you were to really ask me, I think the biggest transformation to address climate change is a transformation of how we imagine ourselves. And we have to imagine ourselves in space and time in different ways. I think we've reduced ourselves to individual objects. Our names, our whole things, our identity systems, all constructed around our individuality. And that's the aspirational goal, rather than recognizing our interdependence. Our theory of everything is a theory of violence. So when you objectify things, when you move things apart and you make them distant, that objectification creates the permission of violence, creates the permission landscape for not caring. So how do we start to reframe and rebuild or reimagine and augment it? I don't think this is going backwards. How do we build an augmented sense of self and a transformative sense of self? I think it's one of the structural projects. At the same time, I think there's also recognition of actually how we recognize that the planet itself is now becoming conscious. So whilst there is us and our interdependence, I think you could argue that the planet itself is becoming conscious in an act of interdependence. So the planet is conscious of the CO2 increase, is now starting to actually transform it. So we are part of the planet being conscious. Machine, human, ecological systems becoming a new type of self-awareness. And that is a beautiful thing. If you look at it through that sense, the planet, we've been able to use satellite data to be able to understand the CO2 implications. We're then being able to transform ourselves in that process. So I think I agree with that. I agree with the kind of idea that this is both big and small, but I think the big and small is very particular. I think it's about ourselves, our idea of the planet and its relationship, and between that is our social imaginaries. It's all these instruments of ownership. It's all these instruments of how we understand money, employment laws. All these things are abstract, object-creating relationships, and I think we have to transfer them to be able to deal with climate change. And I think that this will happen to us whether we like it or not. Is the other reality. I think the scale of risks. We are being made aware of our feedback. This is feedback happening to make us intelligent. All the risks.
Yeah. What do you think is the role of young designers, young entrepreneurs in this shift in thinking and in transitioning?
I think the role of young designers is to be expansive and disruptive. I think one of the things I really, I was in an architectural education meeting and somebody said, we need young designers to be more fit for purpose for our architectural practice. They need to know more about how they can work in architectural practice. I'm like, that's bollocks. I don't want them to know more how to work with me. I want them to disrupt me. They have to be the source of actually a transformation of architectural practices now. They have to be the source of disruption. And I think that's really critical. What I would do is I think the footstep, well, to be really ruthless, I would say design is in such an interesting space. I think it's in the middle of an intellectual vacuum. There is no real architectural theory. There is not. If you want to really understand buildings, you don't go to architects. You go to sort of behavioral economists and other people. I think there's such a great moment for a next generation of designers to really go after how we see the world. And I think that's transforming at a philosophical level all the way towards how we make it. So I think it's a great opportunity for young designers to really challenge everything we see. And I don't think we should be accepting our theories of cities and rural systems. Now, all these languages are broken. They're not fit for purpose. So I think there's a new taxonomy required, a new way to describe and imagine the world required. And that, I think, is really critical for young designers to challenge.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds very hopeful. I want to go now to governance. You talked a lot about governance, right?
Sure.
Yeah, actually, you know, the way you're kind of presenting how we should be redesigning governance, it reminds me a little bit of kind of like the middleman system. I'm putting it, I guess, in the Philippine context. You know, that a lot of craft communities and artisans rely on, in the sense that they need to rely on a middleman or a middle person, you know, to govern their craft enterprise or their craft activity. And in most cases, they are seen as, you know, kind of suspicious. They're not very well trusted, right? Um, and your suggestion, I guess, is not to kind of get rid of governance, right? But to create better governance. And again, to compare that to the craft context, I read somewhere that yeah, we should not get rid of middlemen. We should instead work with enlightened middlemen or middle people. Um, so that was very interesting in the sense that, you know, we need governance to stay in order to create this change. But on the other hand, for me, a lot of governance also relies on trust, right? So how do you think we can rebuild this trust? You know, with our government or with things that govern us. And again, what is the role of designers in rebuilding this trust?
So I think the 21st century is not a middle man or even a middle woman. It's actually middle sort of almost middle autonomous systems. I think the idea of how we can construct contingent machined protocols acting in the middle, I think is going to be really, really critical. So the birth of smart contracts is what I would call is smart intermediaries, smart middle things starting to happen between multiple agents. So I think I think there's been a lot of talk about the disintermediation of the middle, the removal of the middle. I don't think we're going to remove the middle, but I think what we're going to do is reimagine it using machine systems and autonomous machine systems. And I think that's going to be a key part of the transition into. And the question is, what is the role of these middle systems? Is the role to control, or is the role to ennoble? That's a design problem. So if we have a control theory, then these things are about controlling the supply chain through a vertical idea. Whereas actually you can have ennoblement systems which are about providing rapid feedback and distributive innovation capacity in a system, just fundamentally different middle agents. So those middle autonomous agents can be fundamentally designed differently. And I think we have to be thinking about that in really radical formats. And that can be as simple as like the planning legislation is acting as a middleman between actually what we want to design and what the future needs are. And how do we start to reimagine those autonomous agents will be really smart. So I think we'll start from simple things like contracts and making them contingent and making them parametric, and that will reimagine that middle space to become better and better, more interesting in that format. But you're absolutely right to say there's something interesting going on in that middle space. That is what I think there's going to be a lot of imagination around.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something interesting in the middle space. That's true. I guess I have just one last question for you, Indy. Well, you know, I represent the British Council, which is a cultural relations organization, and we're talking a lot about the need to work together, the need to collaborate, but also the fact that there is still such a big disparity between the global North and the global South. Which means that we're coming from very different contexts. We may have very different needs. So, how should the global North be working with the global South, do you think, to make change happen?
There's so many different ways of looking at that question. So I think we need to be really, the scale of impact of climate change will be brutally more felt in the global South than it will be in the global North. So you look at the numbers, it's extraordinary. Then I think if you look at the strategic risks in terms of what those implications are, the need for transformation is in many ways is massive in the global south. But if you look at where the liabilities were created, it's massively driven by the global north. Right. So the global north created lots of liabilities. The effects are going to be felt by the global south. And I think this requires a new type of global relationship. And my big thing is that actually we have to start to recognize our interdependence. I think the UK, from my perspective, should be perceiving itself as a system and should be recognizing itself as part of a metabolic system around the world and having different types of relationships, strategic enablement relationships, building that metabolic idea of how we support global supply chains, global value chains in different formats. And that requires longitudinal investment into that process. So I think we have to start to look more longitudinally. The fourth dimension I would say is I also think that certainly to other parts of the world, I think it's worth recognizing how hardwired lifestyles, carbon systems are in the global north, and there is there is an opportunity to leapfrog those hardwired positions into new ways of living, and I think that's one of the key innovation spaces. New markets and new ideas of being are going to be born, I think, in the global south. They're not going to be born in the global north, which is desperately in a desire to preserve what it thinks is valuable without recognizing the systemic fall away that we're seeing. So I think for me, it's as much about places like the UK learning new ways of being from Philippines and other places as it is anywhere else. So I think there's a degree of solidarity, there's a degree of recognizing ourselves as interdependent, there's creating new innovation pathways and working collaboratively on those, looking at new lifestyles and what's possible, building new kind of what I'd call sustainable supply chains in all those formats, but also recognizing there is a deep interdependence of where those liabilities have come from and how do we support each other to be able to make those transitions. So I think it's all these things. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a rich political answer, but I do think this is a political question in a way, and it requires us to be able to respond in a deep way and with some degree of integrity around that. But I also think these need to be pathways of collective innovation. One of the things I think that is really, really critical. Some of the work that's going on in places like South Korea, Vietnam, is far in excess of maybe what's going on in the UK. So I think there's opportunities of kind of reimagining that. Some of the kind of food supply chain issues that are emerging in Philippines, for example, we're doing some work out there on food systems. Well, there's going to be some really big issues emerging very quickly. And that might be a place of great leadership for Philippines to be able to reimagine its global food systems and look at how it builds biodiversity, embraces the biodiversity of its food system rather than actually narrow it down, which many of the Western systems have already done. So what does that mean of how do you build biodiverse food systems and the integrity that they build and the nutrition density that they build and the value that they construct? So I think there's innovation spaces that are possible in the Philippines that just aren't possible anywhere in other places in the world, and we need to embrace that.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, Indy. There was a lot to unpack with such limited time, but your answers will be well taken note of. So thank you very much. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
I think,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, have a good rest of the day.
Okay, don't go anywhere yet.
Oh,
Please just stay put for a few more seconds. It was an absolute pleasure listening to your conversation. And the good thing about this being on Facebook is that we can always go back and relearn, re-listen to everything that Indy and Lai discussed just now. Can we ask you to stay for a moment so we can have a photo op? We would like to invite, as always, Design Center Executive Director, Ms. Ria Matute, to please join us for this photo.
Hi Lai, hi Indy. I'm such a big fan of Indy, so I'm so happy to have you here. Next time we'll get to hear, physically in the Philippines.
I will definitely. I'll come. You have it on recording now.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Lai. Hold on, pose and give us your best smiles, and let's have this photo. Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Indy, Johar, and Miss Lai Del Rosario. And thank you, of course, to Miss Ria Matute. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Oh, wow. What an amazing discussion. And like I said earlier, you can always rewatch this episode, this dialogue over on Facebook. We will just keep it up there. I think we have time for a quick poll. What do you think? All right. So here's the poll question: which will most likely spark a revolution in the new normal? We're asking all of you, which will most likely spark a revolution in the new normal? Is it an innovative organizational culture? Is it government and policy makers, or new technologies? Which one do you think? An innovative organizational culture, government and policy makers, or new technologies? Get those votes in, and we will check back on the results after this next thing that we are going into. Now, before we go into the break, I would like to acknowledge our partners once again for their relentless support in this event. Much love going out to Adobo Magazine, British Council, HK Walls, Shoney Projects, and Chasing Coral. Check back with us in a few minutes because we have Rex Lore of UNDP Accelerator Labs PH and his keynote on local innovators taking on the challenges of local communities. We are going to flash on your screen as well the feedback form link. Do check it out. Scan the QR code and please fully accomplish that feedback form. That will help us determine what it is that you enjoy, what you'd like to see more of, and what we can do to improve our future events. We will truly appreciate your feedback. Scan the QR code. Reminder again to not forget about that feedback form. The team has linked it over at the comment section as well. The feedback form will serve as your confirmation to receive your Design Futures certificate. This next speaker is a good and ready. All right, we are closing up our afternoon session, or rather evening session now, with a keynote from this gentleman of the UNDP Accelerator Labs Philippines. I'll be introducing him in just a minute. But first, I'd like to acknowledge once again IDC 2021's partners. Thank you to Adobo Magazine, British Council, HK Walls, Shoney Projects, and Chasing Coral. Now, our next speaker is Rex Lore. He is the head of solutions mapping of the United Nations Development Program Philippines. That's UNDP PH Accelerator Lab. The Accelerator Lab primarily supports UNDP Philippines through application of social innovation approaches on the frontier challenges of circular economy, next-gen cities, and local convergences for poverty reduction. Rex has more than 15 years combined management experience in the development sector, the academe, and business, focusing on strategic innovation, social innovation, collective intelligence, solutions mapping, human-centered design, and systems thinking. He designs innovation programs, mentors innovators, and facilitates seminars and workshops on design thinking, systems thinking, social business model generation, strategic planning, and program development. His keynote is entitled Accelerating the SDGs Through Social Design and Innovation. Welcome to the IDC 2021 virtual stage, Rex.
Good evening, everyone. Before I start my presentation, I would just like to acknowledge the Design Center of the Philippines, together with the organizing committee and sponsors of this activity, for bringing the UNDP Accelerator Labs as a keynote, closing keynote for this event. Also, would like to acknowledge the speakers and participants who have been actively participating in this event, and thank you very much. Allow me to go back to 2 years ago. Um, way before the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's in 2020. It seems like so far away. Come to think of it, after enduring 2 years of the pandemic, almost 2 years of the pandemic. In 2020, a global call was announced to accelerate sustainable solutions to all the world's greatest challenges. This includes poverty, gender, climate change, inequalities, funding gaps, among others. Progress is being made in many places, but overall, efforts to achieve the goals are not yet progressing at the required pace or scale. For the past 5 years, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, has been our guiding star as we collectively took the task of ending all forms of poverty. But 2020 and 2021 didn't turn out how we expected it to be. With the launch of the decade of action, also ushered a year where we all want to forget and did not turn out how we expected it to be. Time magazine even called it the worst year ever. Top of the list is the COVID-19 pandemic, which we are still experiencing until now. That was introduced by the eruption of the Taal volcano early in 2020, if you remember that. That was our first taste of the face mask and face shield, way before the pandemic. And there's the global recession, which was fueled by the pandemic. A crisis of peace and democracy in a number of countries all over the world. Assault on human rights here and abroad. Various environmental disasters, including wildfires in the US, Europe, Australia, and Russia, and many more. In summary, what we encountered in the past 2 years has supersized the glaring and deep-seated inequalities and exposed the fragilities of our poor communities. Especially so in our country, where we have experienced a lot of hardship, especially from the poor. And this is compounded by the climate crisis, where the alarms have been ringing so loud, I fear we are starting to be desensitized by it. According to the National Economic Development Authority, the Philippines was consistently registering strong economic growth pre-pandemic, but this was reversed with a negative 9% in the first quarter of 2020. That's a wake-up call for all of us. The labor market also fell, bumping the unemployment rate to almost 18% in the first quarter of 2020, and still continues until now. The PSA, or the Philippines Statistics Agency, reported that in the first quarter of 2015, 4.2 million were jobless, and in May 2021, the same agency reported that 4.2 million families stay hungry. Our own study at the UNDP Philippines, we call it the COVID Pulse Survey, a rapid response survey, regularly deployed in waves and utilizing AI chatbots to gather data, informed us that 70% of the households surveyed experienced a decrease in their income, 60% experienced job losses, and 40% experienced hunger or food insecurity. And this is worsened when you factor in gender, where women suffered more in income and job losses compared to men. To stem the crisis, the government has instituted social safety nets in the form of ayuda or cash assistance, provided stimulus packages to enterprises, instituted universal health care, compensated frontline workers, accelerated the adoption of digital technologies, among others. The list is long. But then again, according to Churchill, we can never let a good crisis go to waste. As with any crisis, there lies great opportunities. And to turn an existing crisis into an opportunity, this requires a reframing of the problem and looking at the issues from a different lens. The 15-year global effort to improve the lives of people everywhere through the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 was already off track by end of 29, as I mentioned a while ago. And the compounding of crisis we have experienced in the past 2 years is reversing decades of progress on poverty, healthcare, and education. However, reframing calls for a need to approach development in a different way. This is the context by which the accelerator labs of the UNDP Philippines, of the United Nations Development Program, was created. We need to be able to reimagine development in the 21st century. We are facing a new set of social and environmental challenges. Effectively addressing 21st century challenges doesn't just require new solutions. It requires new strategies, a reframing, as it were, for us to be able to understand the challenges as they unfold. And sometimes the challenges that we are experiencing now, these are exponential and these are very complex. And our traditional way of doing things seem to not be responsive enough to counter the ill effects and deleterious effects of these challenges. We ask ourselves, how do we better tackle complex and fast-moving challenges? How do we find the most relevant solutions that work locally? Gone are the days where we have, our practice was to parachute ideas coming from the global north going to the global south. But that doesn't work anymore. So the concerns from the north is not necessarily effective to the concerns of the south, the realities of the south. How do we learn more quickly about what works and what doesn't locally? How do we leverage south to south cooperation common from among different countries in the southern hemisphere? The accelerator labs are part of our effort to inject innovation into our organizational DNA. This network of 91 labs in 115 countries is creating new capabilities for national partners to respond to exponential changes and 21st century challenges. And we have one right here in the Philippines. 3 competencies to bridge different facets of the learning cycle are found in the Accelerator Lab. These are exploration, solutions mapping, and experimentation. These key processes in the Accelerator Lab methodology are personified by the heads of the Accelerator Labs. Irina Velasco is the explorer who does horizon scanning and foresight. I, as the solutions mapper, connects with grassroots communities, going down to the ground, as it were, to identify and map scalable solutions through rapid ethnography. And Francis Capistrano, our experimenter, who designs and implements quick and agile experiments so these can be scaled within UNDP or with our partners. We call the Accelerator Lab design process as a learning cycle because accelerated learning is the core value proposition of the Global Accelerator Lab Network. We actually regularly interface and engage other accelerator labs all over the world on a bi-weekly basis, not every other week, but twice a week at the minimum. And we learn from each other's experiences and we share what we know, including the context where the solutions are coming from. The learning cycle follows a 4-step process of sensing, exploring, testing, and growing. Sensing is about understanding what are emerging challenges and opportunities in the local context and determining where we need to focus our attention. Exploring, on the other hand, is about better understanding the challenge and looking for solutions, particularly by looking at how citizens are already addressing these challenges and opportunities. As I mentioned a while ago, we are not into the business of parachuting new ideas, but what we are after is to leverage what is already there and with the principle that innovation is everywhere. I will go into that a little bit later. The third one is testing. It's about designing a portfolio of potential solutions. Please take note that we are not running after single solutions here. We are approaching it from a portfolio, from the portfolio approach to intervene at multiple points in the system and continuously testing them until we are confident they can work. Growing is about handing over the portfolio of solutions, advocacy for policy change, or spinning solutions off as private ventures with our partners. There's a couple of frontier challenges that your accelerator lab here in the Philippines have been pursuing. These are just some of the few. We're actually all over, we have actually partnered with a lot of our team, with our colleagues here at the United Nations Development Program, the different developmental challenges that we are pursuing. But these are among the 5 that we are currently focusing on. Number 1 is collaboration in the innovation ecosystem. Our challenge is to articulate the actors working on the innovation ecosystem, working for development, these challenges and opportunities. Zero extreme poverty. Our challenge is that with the ongoing pandemic, our efforts for poverty reduction have been reversed. And recent simulation estimate that the income poverty count could balloon by 1 million to 6 million individuals. Sustainable cities. Our challenge is the urban population of the Philippines has increased by 50 million in the last 50 years. According to a report by the UNDESA or the UNDSA, around 70%, around 68% to be exact, are going to be living in cities by 2030. And much of the progress will be going towards urban areas. And so we have to be able to think about sustainable, how cities should be built sustainably and designed sustainably. The fourth is on circular economy. Our challenge is that the Philippines is actually tagged as the third in terms of the whole world in terms of plastic pollution causing plastic pollution in the whole world. And in 2020, around 1.88 million metric tons of mismanaged plastic waste was generated by coastal residents alone here in the Philippines, and we need to be able to tackle that. And last but not the least is COVID-19 response and recovery, in which case we're working closely with government partners to be able to deliver and to deliver emergency response, and also at the same time think about recovery moving forward. In the following slides, I will be showcasing to you 2 accelerator lab initiatives that demonstrates how we integrate social design and innovation in development to accelerate attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. The first is on Salik Lakbay and grassroots innovation, which is part of the Inclusive Innovation Frontier Challenge that I just presented to you, that I'm presenting to you right now. And the second is on circular economy. Grassroots innovation. So we'll start first with Salik Lakbay and grassroots innovation. Our goal, Salik Lakbay is actually a solutions mapping methodology that is contextualized and localized based on the realities here in the Philippines. It's a combination of 2 words, which is called saliksik, which means research, and lakbay is travel. We call it Salik Lakbay. And the idea is that we are going in the field, we are going with the communities, engaging them, and looking for solutions. And it's actually and doing solutions mapping. Solutions mapping is one of the principal methodologies of the accelerator labs that allows for a deep immersion into the dynamics of grassroots communities. We actually go down to the communities, especially indigenous communities, to work with grassroots innovators, identify the innovations, and take a look at how these can actually help with sustainable livelihoods, with being scaled up in other communities as well. And what is very unique about the Salik Lakbay is that we are looking at the problem solution space, problem solution continuum. We are moving from the usual problem-based approach to a more solutions-based approach. And the idea here is that some of the solutions, the challenges that the poor have been experiencing are already there. And we need to be able to acknowledge that. We need to be able to bring forward these grassroots innovators, acknowledge them also at the same time, and give them support so that they may be able to further improve the communities where they live in. So we are looking at the problem solution continuum during Salik Lakbay, and we engage the communities together with our partners. So when we talk about, as I mentioned a while ago about the problem solution continuum, we actually talk about how these solutions reflect the deep-seated problems that are represented or manifested by the solutions that we have. This is an example of how how one can actually be in a state of empathy when you identify grassroots solutions, um, grassroots solutions in the communities. Like for example, the tricycles all over the Philippines represent actually an unmet mobility need. Like different designs in different areas reflect the primary reason why these are designed this way. In Pagadian, for example, the tricycles are actually looking upwards, and that is because the streets are inclined. So it's a way for them not to fall over. In Greater Luzon, it's smaller because of the traffic, and smaller spaces. So the tricycle is also built in that way. In Mindanao, in Surigao del Sur, for example, the tricycles are huge because there's their lack of jeepneys, and these are the tricycle actually act like jeepneys. In Butuan, it looks like a waterproof tank because it floods all the time and make sure that everyone who rides a tricycle is not wet. In southern Mindanao, uh, it's actually point to point areas in towns and barangays in southern Mindanao are actually far away from each other, and they have to redesign the tricycle in such a way that it allows for longer ride time, more comfortable ride time also at the same time. And of course, sa bundok, we have a tricycle made in such a way, the motorcycle designed in such a way that it can actually go through small spaces. So what are we looking for? What we are looking for is actually going beyond just um, designer-led innovations. And this is actually a difference between designing for, with, and by, and specific to that, we are looking for designer-led or user-led, not designer-led, not co-created, but user-led innovations. And these are solutions that are developed by end users for themselves, their families, and communities. Um, Sometimes we encounter that there are other grassroots innovators uh, that co-create with designers. But for the purpose of grassroots innovation, we actually are particularly looking for those that are already used by the community, made by the community for their own purposes. And grassroots innovations are created by people who are affected by an issue directly or indirectly, and are not created by private companies, academe NGOs, or government agencies. So these are not the ones that where where designers uh, come up with something new and offer it to the communities. Um, what we are after is for us to be able to develop these user-led grassroots innovations that we find in the communities right now. So categories that we are looking for here includes nature-based solutions, sustainable livelihoods, indigenous crafts and technologies, ethnobotanicals, heirloom recipes. And we've done this in partnership with the Department of Science and Technology for their program called Grassroots Innovation for Inclusive Development. The criteria for selection includes that these are user-led and grassroots-based, meaning it's coming from them, it's made by them, it's developed by them. We also look at technical feasibility. Um, this is where scientists, our partners, or from the Department of Science and Technology, and researchers from the academe come in, where they would provide, you know, um, where they would provide that lens of technical feasibility for us to be able to identify if these grassroots innovators can be scaled or can be utilized in other areas, and to identify also the rigor at the same time. And sometimes you it actually would take someone from outside the community to identify these grassroots innovators, because most of these grassroots innovators doing these hacks does not actually see them as innovations because it's something that they use every day, and it takes someone with a new lens, with a new perspective to see the rigor, the beauty, and the technology behind what they do, the processes, the beautiful processes that about what they do, especially in related to indigenous crafts. The third is widely used by the community, meaning there's already initial traction. And then the fourth one is potential for scale in other communities. And you will be surprised in our experience is that some of these grassroots innovations that we find are sometimes seen in other communities, but they are approached differently. And by mapping these grassroots innovations, we'll be able to learn from them, and we'll be able to do some exchanges with grassroots innovators to further improve the product that they have. So let me show you a very quick video about what we have done so far with the Department of Science and Technology Grassroots Innovation for Inclusive Development Program.
Hi, Rex. Apologies for interrupting, but is it okay if we play the video again? Because I think we encountered a technical problem and we don't have an audio with the video. Is it
Right.
okay?
Okay. So sure. Let me just reshare it.
It looks
Apologies
like an
for that one.
amazing it looks like an amazing video. We didn't want our viewers to miss out on the essence of it.
Right. Yeah. For a while.
No problem. Very good presentation. I especially love at the very beginning when you shared that never let a crisis go to waste. I wrote that down. I'm like, oh yes, I like that quote.
Can you hear the video now?
Not yet. Let's just wait for it and make sure to share audio.
Yeah, I'm playing it right now.
Okay, no audio yet though.
All right.
Okay, would you like to proceed with your presentation?
Yes, I'd like to proceed with my presentation.
Okay,
Apologies
Rex.
for that one. I can share with everyone the video later on.
Okay, the virtual stage is back on you. Back to
All
you.
right. Thank you. All right. So the whole point of the video actually, apologies for that, is that what Professor Anil Gupta, the Honeybee Network, has been telling us, teaching us in the accelerator lab, that rather than looking at inhabitants of poor regions collectively as a sink for aid and advice, we need to recognize their contributions formally as a source of inventions and innovations. And this is the whole idea of the principle of that innovation is everywhere, that minds at the margins are not marginal minds, that anywhere you look, whether you go to Quiapo, whether you go to very informal communities in Tondo or in the Paseco compound, you'd find people innovating in their own way. And that by engaging with them, immersing with them, trying to understand the the problem behind the solution, the process behind how they're doing stuff, you'd be able to find that there's actually some kind of rigor in what you see, and that it takes actually at the same time for us to be able to go with the community, immerse ourselves, and see that that they actually have something to contribute to nation building. They're not just recipients of aid; they're actually contributors to the development of the country as well. And we need to be able to acknowledge that. We have to shift our understanding that we come in communities like superheroes, bringing in aid, parachuting aid. We need to be able to acknowledge that there are solutions everywhere, and we just need to be able to co-create with them, work with them in a participatory way. And this is, I think, the challenge in every social designer right now, and a challenge for all the young designers today. That it's actually very romantic to come to think of it. That you come up with a very good idea, but what is really important now is for us to be able to work together with these communities, so that by their inspiration and by your acumen, you'd be able to come up with better solutions that already work. And so, who are we partnering with? As I mentioned a while ago, we have partnered with the Department of Science and Technology, Region 11, in launching the grassroots innovation for inclusive development in the area. We have prototype the grassroots innovation for inclusive development program in the region. We have conducted around 8 salik lakbays in the area. We've gone up Mount Talaingod, Mount Hamoygitan, um, some of which I was not able to go because of the COVID-19. We have engaged the tribal communities, trained 300 plus salik lakbayers, um, interfaced with more than 100 grassroots innovators in rural communities and in the urban jungle actually, both jungle, the rural jungle and the urban jungle, and have actually mapped around 200 plus grassroots innovations that are being kept right now uh, with the Department of Science and Technology. And the commitment of of the agent of the department is to be able to develop and incubate 25% of these grassroots innovators, so that we may be able to help, we may be able to assist the communities where these solutions are coming from. We have also partnered with Becoming Filipino, Kulas, no? Or Kyle Jennerman. He's one of our influencers who have joined us in various Salik Lakbays. I think there's one more coming soon in Mount Apo. And the target are ethnobotanicals and heirloom recipes in the area. At the global scale, we have partnered, we are supported by the UNESCO, the UNDP Asia Pacific Regional Innovation Center, the Accelerator Lab Global, Nesta for Tomorrow with Hyundai and UNDP, and the Honeybee Network with Professor Anil Gupta. And we see this as an accelerated model for simultaneous global and local learning. But what have we learned so far? So our work here in the Philippines was actually um, recognized by Fast Company in an article entitled "We Have a Solution to a Global Problem," and in that article that we were um, that the Philippines, that the grassroots innovation initiative in the Philippines was mentioned, is that innovation is everywhere, and we need to identify, encourage, and enable the grassroots innovators. No? Um, because these grassroots innovators are actually the gatekeepers of the community. They are the convergent points in the community. When you encourage them, when you enable them, when you empower them, you actually empower the community as well. The second one is the recently released public public policy research conducted by the London School of Economics, where the Accelerator Lab in the Philippines are part of in study. The OST's grind program, according to them, is a significant step in the right direction and needs to be expanded to the national scale. and that is what we are working now. And this needs a lot of support coming from designers, coming from from the design center of the Philippines, as we push the grind program to scale at the national level. And I bet uh, Ms. Rhea Matute would be happy to work with us. I'm sure that you'll be interested to work with our grassroots innovators in the community. And the third is on our soon to be released policy research on inclusive innovation in the Philippines, which I am leading. It's entitled Reimagining Inclusive Innovation in the Philippines, and it actually pointed to the lesson that COVID-19 pandemic gave rise to emerging inclusive innovation models beyond the usual startup and entrepreneurial pursuits, um, to include public sector innovation and grassroots innovation. COVID-19 pandemic, as I mentioned a while ago, presents opportunities as well. It's a crisis with opportunities, and it actually allowed and surfaced emerging models such as grassroots innovations and public sector innovation to flourish in the Philippines. And this goes down to the whole idea that we have to be able to expand uh, the conversation of innovation from that of a very entrepreneurial, very startup-ish type of conversation, and broadening it to include more sectors, no, um, and to include more sectors, and to for us to be able to for us to be able to encourage and make the paradigm shift that innovation is not just for the elites, but it's actually for all. um, right, so moving on, that's the first one. It's grassroots innovation and our salik lakbay, and I hope that you would be part of the salik lakbay community, and encouraging you as well to be a salik lakbayer. You can actually the salik lakbay module is actually free to download at the UNDP website. My second use case that I'm going to share with you today is about circular economy in the city, and this is related to uh, our frontier challenges of next gen cities and circular economy. And what we have done here is that we utilized, not integrated, utilized a, a different form of design process called systemic design, and we used we apply that in circular economy, focusing on passing city. And the idea is that we are focusing on circular economy at the city level, because the city is actually fast becoming a front line for change in the whole in going moving towards 2030. And it's very important that when we promote circular economy, we should be able to present some kind of a prototype or a use case on how circular economy can be implemented in the city. And we identified Pasig as our partner in implementing a circular economy using systemic design as an approach. Our aim was really to stress test how a circular economy might serve as a practical vision for addressing the plastic waste challenge, particularly in the city context. Our entry point for circular economy is waste management, solid waste management, and that is where the initial inquiry started. And our approach is the integration of systems thinking and human-centered design called systemic design. The output is actually a portfolio of interventions and experiments for collective implementation at the city level. Before I continue to describe a little bit about the whole process, allow me to show you this framework, because this will provide some kind of a mindset and the framework to how we are approaching the challenge of circular economy in the city. As with any challenges that we are experiencing here in the 21st century, going towards 2030, um, climate change and climate change is one of the uh, most more one of the most complex challenges in the world today. And a portion of climate change, the climate change conversation, um, is that circular economy is one of the proposals that one of the strategies that are being proposed to help mitigate the the effects of climate change in the whole world. And so we are beset with this as a complex development challenge. And the idea of this systemic design work is that we are approaching the initial understanding by looking at the interdependent linkages between human systems and the natural or physical world. So we're looking at the relationships, immersing ourselves, trying to understand at the street level how people are behaving with this challenge. And then second is we're looking at systemic drivers. What are the political drivers, the economic models, the cultural norms, the power dynamics, not just with the city government, but also at the same time with different actors within the city. And the actors within the actors that we see in the city is actually different from what you can find in the national scale. The third is strategic risk and uncertainty. What are this is the destabilization of the current system, the emergent variables. So these are the initial understanding that we are looking at, and we are approaching this from the perspective of a portfolio mindset. And we are not unlike we are actually approaching this from a layered perspective. We are not we are not doing inductive or deductive thinking here. We are layering via abductive thinking. We're looking at strategic narrative against time, which looks at the long-term impact. We are we are trying to enhance coherence by looking at the levers of change and the value chain. We are building a movement also at the same time by looking at engagement and ecosystem. And we are trying to do iterative experimentation in a portfolio. We are not doing one experiment. We are doing a series of experiments that target specific leverage points in the system that is currently being identified. So this is the whole mindset and philosophy that we are pursuing when we do systemic design for circular economy. So just a little bit of update of where we are right now. The systemic design workshop for circular economy. We have done the rapid ethnographic research, and we conducted a month-long rapid ethnography in Pasig City. If you're familiar with human-centered design or design thinking, this is empathy. But this is a deeper way of pursuing it because we're doing rapid ethnography, and there's a whole process involved in doing so that includes really immersion, that includes immersion, that includes other tools for us to get a better picture, a clearer picture of what's happening on the ground, targeting different sectors and actors within the circular economy ecosystem. And we in our Pasig work, in our systemic design work, we interviewed 25 ecosystem actors that cuts across different sectors in the community. And then output is the user persona stories presented during the um, presented during the output is the user persona stories presented during the systemic design workshop. And then all right, so systemic design workshops on circular economy conducted. We've done already systemic design workshops on circular economy. We conducted 5 systemic design workshops attended by about 50 participants, actually more than 50, close to 100, who joined representing local and national government, private, CSO, and academic sectors, including the Design Center of the Philippines. And then we are very happy for that, and we're getting very good commitments coming from different sectors in the community. And the third one is a portfolio of circular economy solutions. And this is currently ongoing, and the core team is currently finalizing the portfolio of solutions ready for experimentation. So we will be able to come up with a set with a portfolio with actually sub portfolios depending on the different portfolio of options that has come out, or the portfolio options, the clusters of solutions that have come out from this work. The rapid ethnographic study is actually very interesting, and I think this is something that that sort of like brings down the whole idea of brings down the systemic design workshop to the ground, and sort of like anchors the whole analytical process with real lived experiences by people. And we have identified seven user personas. They include the curious public servant, the waste manager, the entrepreneur, eco-conscious entrepreneur, the the alarmed youth influencer, the social innovator, and many more. Um, the the research on the rapid ethnographic study report will be released soon. We're just finalizing the publication, and that will be publicly released. And there's a lot of interesting insights in the study, and these are some of the few that I would like to share with you. Number one is that the interview is characterized the city as having two distinct symbolic communities, and that's why we call it the tale of two cities here. And this is the formal and informal communities, and these are distinct because how they act within these communities is different from the other community. But there is a weirdly unique way of how people living in this community are adapting to to the other type of community when they are there. So yeah, so for example, those who are living um, in in informal communities where sometimes sometimes the idea is that they don't really care about the environment, but when they are in BGC, for example, or in a mixed use development area, they seem to adopt they seem to adopt the structures behind the rules and the structures and the policies behind the community. So there's um, the structure of the community actually plays a big role in how people behave and act. Second is because of this inherent uniqueness, solutions should be a combination of education, awareness, incentivization, and punitive actions. Third is leveraging kapitbahayan and the spirit of voluntarism. Fourth is when waste is perceived by people as a commodity that has value, this encourages people to treat them differently. And this is perhaps the idea of upcycling and recycling. And I'm sure that a lot of designers here today are currently looking at that, how you'd be able to create value out of the waste, especially those of plastics. The fifth one is that local governments are in the best position to leverage the ecosystem by supporting sectors working in the city through a combination of support in business, technology, and policy. So local governments should be encouraged to be enablers, no? Not just regulators. Six is the COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruptions and surfaced new challenges in various aspects affecting all sectors, especially in the value chain, affecting even the waste value chain. The seventh is circular economy related projects and initiatives, including the actors involved, do not seem to follow a common and cohesive strategic vision, which points to the need for government and different sectors to be acting in unison when we pursue this. So these insights that were surfaced after the distillation of different raw data that we collected from the user personas and user stories, we we use them for us to be able to inquire and create the current state and the desired state of the system map in Pasig City. And after that, we identified a couple of system shifts, the desired system shifts, and this points to around six system shifts that are prioritized in the portfolio of options that we are going to plan. Um, Number one is the new production model or waste generation is avoided by design, and this is where um, designers are called to action. How do we redesign? How do we design materials in such a way that that no waste is generated at maximum or it's avoided, and how do you redesign in such a way that um, post the life of the product, this can be easily be recycled or upcycled so that there is less residual waste after the product life cycle. The second one is concerted effort by all stakeholders to prioritize investment in new or leveraging existing infrastructure and innovative solutions that enable circularity. So this looks at investment and resources. And what's very unique with the Metro Manila cities is that there are already nascent infrastructure such as MRFs and urban gardens that are already sprouting all over the city, and these can be actually become hubs where we can come in and gather support from people, and where we can introduce new ways of doing, especially in design, especially in coming up with new business solutions in the area. So one of the major things that we are pursuing is turning MRFs into circular economy hubs that would include fabrication labs, and then and encouraging experimentation in upcycling. Third is expanding responsibility and accountability that covers producers, consumers, and policymakers. So this is just going beyond enhanced producers responsibility or EPR, but it's actually going towards collective responsibility. Next is collaboration, leveraging collective action among diverse stakeholders to promote a systemic approach to circular economy. And next is enabling policies um, and interventions that are based on strategic considerations. So at the local level, there has to be enabling policies to the risk, the opportunities that we have identified. And last but not the least is more on the mental model, and this mental models focusing especially on malasakit. And malasakit is a very strong value from from Filipinos. It might not be apparent, but this has come out from our ethnography that malasakit is a strong behavioral nudge for Filipinos, especially in communities. A circular economy should be based on malasakit, diskarte, and pananagutan. So yeah, so those are the desired system shifts defined. So moving forward, how do we create a portfolio of options leading towards the portfolio of experiments. So we are approaching this from a portfolio perspective for systemic problems, and we are exploring a portfolio of options and enhanced coherence. So we are actually layering uh, different perspectives here, and we're looking for key dimensions and levers for change. And we are looking at the value chain that looks at production, which is upstream, the utilization, which is midstream, and downstream, which is focusing on waste management against the system change that we identified, the system shifts that we identified. Number one is the new model, investment and collaboration, collective responsibility, enabling policies, and malasakit. So these are areas that we would like to be able to act on multiple leverage points so that we would be able to shift the needle in the whole system, going from the current state of which we are experiencing right now to a desired state where it is possible for us to be able to push for a circular economic model using the systemic design approach. Right? So that's it for our the circular economy frontier challenge. So I have just presented to you just a while back use cases, and I would like to take stock from our journey the past 2 years in the accelerator lab, and it there's a lot of learnings that we have gained from the complex challenges that we are engaging and that we are working with, that we're tackling at the Accelerator Lab. This is are just two of the challenges that we are doing. We are also working with zero extreme poverty with the movement of around 100 plus CSOs, working to bring 1 million Filipinos out of poverty by 2030. And as I mentioned a while ago, we're working with next gen cities by especially on introducing financial inclusion in cities, and then and many more. So from the many experiences that we have in the Accelerator Lab, and these are the collective lessons that I think I would be able to um, to share with everyone who are listening today or participating in the International Design Conference. And I'd like to encourage you to also reflect with me as I continue with the presentation, to take stock and reflect on what I have learned so far. So these are some of the few learnings that I would like to share from the collective experience that we have with the pandemic, with coming up with tackling these complex challenges, and from the use cases that I presented to you a while ago. Number one is on sustainable development goals, and we should be able to anchor initiatives with the SDGs. Whatever it is that you are working on, when you want to go into social design, you want to go into social innovation, you have to be able to anchor your initiatives to the SDGs, especially looking at the 231 unique indicators. It seems too much, no? Um, my challenge for everyone is for you not to just say that we are working towards SDG number one, no poverty, and SDG number 17, which is a partnership for the goal. I'd like you to go beyond that and really study the different indicators um, under each SDG. And why I'm asking, why I'm challenging that is that because that's the only way that we would be able to align different initiatives globally. We just don't want to have, just because it sounds like climate change, it actually looks at um, specifically on SDG on the climate change or on responsible consumption and production, because when you deep dive on the SDG on climate change, it actually talks about global greenhouse gas emissions. So is your the solution that you are proposing something that is related to that or not? So you have to be mindful of that as well. We complain that we always seem at a loss as to how to align our individual and institutional initiatives, and the SDGs are there as our north star. When we do want to do something to change the world in your own way, align it with the SDGs because you are aligning it with the world. The second is to think in systems and anchor in empathy. It is not a false dichotomy. There is no race, and it's not a competition between which type of approach is better. An eclectic way that fits the reality of the challenge is always the best approach. It is neither not either or. Design is intentional and is intrinsically linked to birth meaningful form to our ideas. Systemics, on the other hand, leverages on interdependence and reciprocal influence, and we can benefit from both. You can actually be an eclectic designer. Learn from the best. I've seen the list of speakers today. They're all wonderful, superb speakers. Learn from them. Um, but and also at the same time try to create something new out of it. The third one is to accelerate change. We cannot afford to exist in silos, and this is something that we pushed all the time when we in our work at Accelerator Labs. We need to work together and act in unison. When we design projects and initiatives, uh, at the beginning we already try to identify who our partners are, how will they benefit from this, how will they be able to contribute to the success of the projects that you are working with. Um, if you want to go into social design, social innovation, I encourage you to share as well. Um, it counterintuitive when we come to think of it from a startup perspective, where you want to keep as much. When you talk about development, when you talk about the SDGs, it's the opposite. You have to be able to share, because complex frontier challenges require different sectors and actors working together in an integrated manner by pooling resources, knowledge, and expertise. You cannot solve a complex challenge alone. And the last but not the least is we need to leverage accelerated learning among the various networks existing in the Philippines today. I understand that there is, in the Philippines, there is always this um, part of our culture is very cliquish, that we have the tendency to create our own network, that that this group you have is your own network, and then you're the best, or you feel like you're the best, or there's something that something that makes your network different from the others. But at the end of the day, it's really, when you want to accelerate learning, if you want to accelerate the SDGs, you have to be able to tap into different networks, because they offer different things at the same time, and you can leverage the resources, knowledge, and expertise of different networks from this. In our research on our policy research on inclusive innovation, which we presented in the with the in a high level policy dialogue last week. We we one of the insights that came out from the research is that the pandemic experience has taught us that those who are open and able to share rapidly within the network are more resilient than others. We realize that those businesses, those individuals, those local government units, no, those uh, who are able to share among their peers, are those that are able to come up with innovative solutions. They are able to become more resilient. They are able to respond well and deliver services rapidly. Um, and they actually learn from sharing, and they actually come up with better and innovative services when they because of this type of accelerated learning. And so this is a let me end my my speech with my presentation with an invitation to everyone to learn together. If you look at the whole experience of the accelerator lab and my presentation, learning is always a seem to be the repetitive word that you see and that you hear. And the idea of the accelerator labs is really not about coming up with the best cutting edge technologies, but actually for us to be able to model accelerated learning globally. Uh, and of course locally. In other words, local accelerated learning. So I encourage you all that we learn together, and I'm happy that Design Center of the Philippines has organized this conference as a learning journey for all, sharing journey for all, and we hope that we will be able to recover fast and be more resilient in future crises as we move towards accelerating development um, of the SDGs and attaining its achievement by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Inspiring words, Rex. I feel hopeful about what is next for all of us. I'm going to read a couple of comments that came in during your presentation. This one is from FB, or Facebook rather, and this is from Annalisa Florida Perez, who says the role of design is very critical in nation and community building. We need to develop the leadership skill of designers in terms of community leadership, connecting, and relationship building. Design and designers will be at the forefront in leading change. Another one sent in via Zoom from Therese Paman. I also love this when you presented it earlier. Minds at the margins are not marginal minds. Thank you very much, Rex. Oh wow,
Thank you.
it has been a full day of learning indeed, and I love how you emphasize that we need to be humble enough to know that, well, that was actually mentioned earlier this morning, but when you were emphasizing the need to still learn and be open to learning, because we can't really know everything there is to know. You said earlier, you posted a quote, never let a crisis go to waste. What is your final message for all of our viewers so they also do not let this crisis go to waste?
Yeah, so actually that's actually a call and a challenge for all, right? I mean, what's very important in this time of our crisis right now, and where if you come to think of it, exactly a year ago, we were hoping that by this time we were already, in the beaches of
Yes.
Boracay and Siargao, but unfortunately, it's extended. Um, it's uncontrollable. We don't know what will happen, and we are still on a crisis. Um, and what we are experiencing now is actually, it might be very hard for all of us to go through this extended lockdown,
Mm.
but this is a call and a challenge for everyone to go past, way past the idea that you can't do anything, because you have to be able to channel all that negativity into something positive and use this moment for us to be able to come up with new ways for us to be able to help each other. Um, and you can do this in many ways. And as I mentioned a while ago, learning is one of the best ways for us to be able to. We might be very tired with our Zoom calls, but if you still have creative ways to do Zoom calls in a way that where you can actually virtually share drinks with each other, or
Yes.
share vouchers with each other and talk and shift the conversation beyond just talking about what happened with the latest the latest movie on Netflix, and actually trying to look at what's happening on the country today, looking especially at poverty, looking at how we would be able to help government as well to deliver better services. This is not the time to put blame on people. I know that elections is
Yes.
coming in,
Yes.
but I'd like everyone to go beyond that, the political posturing and polarization, because at the end of the day, if we do not help each other, we will not come out better from this experience of ours. We have to be able to go past negativity. We have to be able
Yes.
to come up with solutions together.
Absolutely agree with you on everything that you have stated so far. Kumbaga, at this point of this crisis, we're already more than a year in. We're already past that grieving period. We're already past that period of being stressed or anxious or worried, not knowing how to handle things. Now is the time to take action, to lay the foundation for what's after this pandemic, what we call the better normal. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Rex, please stay put, because right now it is time to bring in our executive director, Ms. Ria Matute, so that we can have a photo. And I hope you got to see the message earlier when you sent out an invite for her. She automatically said yes, she wants to be involved. So let's have Ms. Ria join us.
Hi Rex. Hi Rex. No, definitely.
Hi,
No.
Thank you.
It's there for everyone to see. I said yes. For the green
Yes,
innovators.
most definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of plans that we have coming from the STEMic design workshop that we've done together.
Well, you can count on us, no? We're in.
Thank you.
It was actually a very quick yes, Rex. Like a few seconds after you posed the question, Miss Ria typed it in. She's like, yes. All right, let's give our photographers our best smiles, because this is the last and final session for today. 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Thank
so
you very much.
Thank
It was a
you,
pleasure.
Rex. Thank you, and see you, Rex. Thank you as well to Miss Ria. She'll be taking the stage in just a few minutes. But do you remember our poll? Yep, we have the results in. We asked you earlier which will most likely spark a revolution in the, I don't want to say new normal, but better normal. How's that? Which will most likely spark a revolution in the new normal or the better normal? Is it an innovative organizational culture, government and policymakers, or new technologies? What do you think? Which one did you vote for? All right, let's have the results now, shall we? So you have 40% being an innovative organizational culture, 40% government and policy makers, and 20% for new technologies. So it is a toss up between innovative organizational cultures and government and policy makers. Thank you very much for participating with our on our polls. Appreciate it. How about that, everyone? Ladies and gents, we have reached the closing of the IDC 2021 Design Futures. The future is now. I don't know about you, but I feel like time just flew by so quickly. I just introduced the speaker, and next thing I know, they are done with the presentation. We've had the pleasure to explore different perspectives on design in just 2 days. We have seen the potential of design to affect radical and far-reaching change through people and projects that confirm design's new sense of purpose and mission, which is to drive change for the better and finding value in stories that go beyond doing well to actually doing good. And with that, I would now like to turn over the virtual stage to Design Center Executive Director to officially close this year's International Design Conference. We have Executive Director, Ms. Ria Matute.
Thank you, Jelly. Well, good evening, everyone. So this is it. We've reached the closing of the Design Center's 2021 edition of the International Design Conference, Design Futures, the Future is Now. First of all, I would like to thank everyone who have generously shared their time and their perspective on design. From yesterday with Pam, Diego, and Beth, who challenged us on the need to consciously cross over this pandemic portal, hopefully with our Filipino values of kapwa and discarte. To Carvey, Pamela, Angel, and Abby, who reconnected us with the boldness and audacity of the young to do well and to do good. To Nina, Ken, and Andre, who underlined that we must never lose sight of the real person who is the heart of why we design and who really needs the impact of design to matter greatly. To Richard and Gutsy, who reminded us that while we are celebrating Design Consciousness Week here in the Philippines, it is also Climate Week, and our corals and our oceans have been absorbing the cost of our short future perspective, and that has got to stop. To Petra and Chaz, our creative warriors who prompt us that social problems are also design problems, and we look forward to them continuing this discussion with their set of change makers this coming October. To Louie and Jelly, who talked about nature's intelligent design that serve as an inspiration for us to solve the problems we humans have created. To Kim for opening our eyes on how all these crises are impacting how we see the world and thus create new value pillars. To Indy and Lai for opening our eyes to usher deep code innovation to address deep code errors and the urgent need to build a new system in the world that enables. To Rex for pushing social innovation to provide solution to the long-term problem continuum and opening our eyes to grassroots innovators. We at Design Center would be very honored to collaborate with UNDP and Accelerator Lab and these amazing grassroots innovators. In line with our vision for the International Design Conference, we hope that we have shared with you the new territories of design in order to unleash its power to affect radical and far-reaching change, most especially its huge potential to address local and global wicked problems. Aside from being insanely busy with our events and our design projects, we at Design Center are also excited to dovetail our discussions here at the International Design Conference to the formulation of the Philippines' first national design policy. We hope to continue to engage with you in this new conversation on design. Thank you to all of you for being with us the last 2 days, and we hope to see you again in our next event, Design Week Philippines, who is celebrating 10 years this October. Lastly, to the International Design Conference team, composed of Karam, Ace, JM, Queenie, Selena, Kyle, Mardil, Kenneth, and Bea, Thank you for all your hard work and dedication to ensure the quality of the content and the gathering of the local and global thought leaders from various fields. Bravo. And to all our partners, Ron and Team, Eventscape, Adobe Magazine, the British Council, Chasing Corals, Hong Kong Walls, Shoni Projects, thank you for all your support. So on this Friday evening, once again, we express our deep gratitude for joining us the last 2 days and actively engaging with us as we share with you design's new territories. I wish you all a restful weekend with your loved ones. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you very much. Applause. I know it's been a very busy day for you, Executive Director Ria, jumping from one meeting to another and still being present for every single thing here at the IDC 2021. I don't know how you did it, but you did. So congratulations and thank you so much for having me. Ladies and gentlemen, again, a round of applause, please, for Executive Director Ria Matute.
For Design Center, I mean, there's an amazing team behind this event. So
For the entire Design Center team, congratulations to all of you and bravo. And to Executive Director Ms. Ria, thank you for never failing to bring this global scale design event. And advance congratulations, advance anniversary, 10th anniversary celebration in about a month. So more planning happening soon. Thank you to our speakers from day 1 to day 2. You were all amazing and your work speaks for itself. You are all an inspiration to designers, non-designers, and aspiring change makers. Thank you as well to our partners, Adobe Magazine, British Council, HK Walls, Shoni Projects, Chasing Coral, and the Department of Trade and Industry Export Marketing Bureau, or the DTI EMB. And lastly, thank you to all of our participants over on Facebook and Zoom. Bravo to all of you for closing off and starting your weekend with us. Thank you very much for joining, especially for those of you who were there day 1 and then on to day 2. We appreciate you and thank you for having the passion to further learn about design and its impact on our future. We hope that our community grows larger now that we have scratched the surface of what our future will look like. This is just scratching the surface, everyone. Now, before I leave you, I would like to remind our audience to once again fill out the feedback form that is linked in our comment section. And we are also flashing the QR code right now. Please do scan that and accomplish the feedback form fully. This will serve as your confirmation to get your Design Futures certificate. For any of you who would like to go back through our sessions, maybe you missed something or you found one that was truly impactful and you just want to watch it again, you want to relearn everything that we have presented, do a rewatch. The complete playlist will be available at the Design Center's official Facebook page and YouTube account. So you know where to head on over. Okay. An absolute pleasure and honor being with all of you this entire day. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Jelly Victor. Again, thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you again next year at the International Design Conference 2022.